So my partner and I moved to a desert community in the American Southwest. I've always wanted to live down here, and so far I absolutely love it. I love the quiet, living on the outskirts of town with a desert to my horizon on the backyard, how friendly people are, the stars blooming at night, the wildlife, just the overall space. I'm not really bothered by the occasional snake, scorpion, or coyote in my yard. But recently, I've been getting the feeling that there have been other creatures in my yard as well. Even if I'm not imagining it, I don't know if this is worth doing something about or what I even can do, but I'll try to explain. My partner got a lucrative job offer from a hospital here, where he covers the night shift for his specialty at most of the local hospitals in 3 states. Small hospitals in remote areas often offer nice incentives to bring people in from larger cities. Since we were looking to move here anyway, we decided to take the position for a couple of years and see if I could find a job in my field here in the meantime. At the moment, I'm actually working remotely, and I stay on the night shift to be able to see my fiancé more. We get up at around 2 to 3 p.m. and he goes to work, early enough for me to run around and do any shopping or chores in the afternoon. He gets back from work at around 5 a.m., and we head to bed at around 7 a.m. It's a pretty intense schedule, but at least he has every other week off. This is important later. So around 5 p.m., I'm home alone all day at the duplex that we rent from an elderly couple down the block. We used to have a medical resident living on the other side, but she would never talk to us, and one day she just moved out. Apparently, she really tore the place apart, so there are contractors working in the other side during the days on most days. I sit at the kitchen table and work during the night, occasionally going out to walk our old dog, get the mail, or water the plants in the courtyard. The entire house is visible from that courtyard, because there are windows and glass doors leading to basically every room from there. From here, I'll just detail the various incidents as they've occurred with minimal editorializing. Number 1. 4 weeks ago, I went back to sleep after my partner left for work. About an hour later at one point, I woke up and realized that my dog had been barking for an unusually long time, and doing his danger bark as well. The lawn guys and delivery folks occasionally come into our courtyard, and we just moved in, so I figured it must be something like that. Still, he knows those delivery guys and neighbors by now, and they usually leave fairly quickly. He must have been barking for a full 2+ minutes by now. I sat up in bed and looked out into the courtyard. There was a man I didn't recognize, and he was acting quite weird. He was standing near the front door, trying to look into the windows around the side, looking into windows progressively further from the door. Without thinking, I called out to him, "I'll be right there." I thought perhaps he was a delivery guy needing a signature or something. The guy stepped back quickly, turned around, and walked out of the courtyard. As he did so, he gave me this extremely malevolent stare. I had never quite seen anything like it before. It startled me because he looked right at me, dead in the eye through the window, and just looked so disgusted and hateful. But during the day, you can't even see through the blinds from the outside. I've checked. So how the hell did he know where I was? I admit, this event freaked me out and may have laid the groundwork for my impressions of the potentially perfectly normal events outlined below. I flash back to this moment regularly for some reason. 2. 3 weeks ago, some strange stuff started to happen. My partner offered to work some extra shifts on what would normally be his week off, so I was home alone even more often. A few times, I would hear what I thought must be one of my elderly neighbors around the side of the house, but when I went to check, there was nobody there. I would start to hear someone walking around the outside at night as well. The area is surrounded by gravel, so unless someone steps slowly, you can hear the things moving around. When I'm laying in bed working on things a few times, I become acutely aware of noise just outside the bedroom window late at night. I started checking the area with a flashlight when I went outside. Sometimes I would hear bipedal footsteps on the roof multiple times during periods where the neighbors confirmed that no contractors were supposed to be up there. often at night. The feeling of being watched a lot at night began as well, and I started leaving the outdoor lights on all night while I'm there, especially in the courtyard. I stopped taking showers alone because I sometimes heard footsteps on the roof when I was in there, and there's a skylight over the shower. I researched, bought, and installed the security system and a couple of cameras in that courtyard. Number 3. 2 weeks ago, this is when things got a bit more serious. I pulled into my parking space and saw one of the elderly neighbors peering into my bedroom window in the afternoon. I greeted him, and he said he was going around the side of the house to activate the sprinkler system that happens to have a hub on our property. Unclear if this is related. I put up opaque clings in the windows of the bedroom to block some of the light when we're sleeping during the day. As soon as I did, I stopped feeling being watched from the bedroom window, but began feeling uncomfortable that my view of the courtyard was now obscured. Still though, I felt better for 2 days at least. The next night, I started feeling being watched from the living room windows while I was working though, and eventually the kitchen window specifically. That night, I had a small panic attack, and spent a lot of time in bed under the covers with my dog in the room with me. I don't know the source of my discomfort though, and kept telling myself I was just being paranoid. I chalked it up to reading some creepy stuff the week before. I even had to cancel an event because I couldn't sleep because of the extreme anxiety. I talked at length with my partner about getting more cameras, but we didn't have enough money. I was still in denial about the reasons for my discomfort, so I dropped it. I did notice though that stuff in the courtyard seemed to be sometimes moved around, and I watched the camera to figure out that the neighbor woman had done it. Beer cans and some other stuff were found around the property that weren't ours too, but I think it might have been the wind. Things related to our cars and garbage cans started being messed with, but you can see around for miles and there weren't really many people around to do so. I started hearing a tapping on the window too, but I ignored it. 4. Last week. We were traveling for part of the week, and when we got back we were in very good spirits. My partner went right back to work, and my nights became more predictable. Feeling good and doing things until a few hours after it gets dark, suddenly feel a bit shitty, not wanting to do things that put me near the windows. I decide to curl up in bed with my dog in my room, and refuse to move until my partner gets home. Well, this happened every night this past week. Finally though, I noticed that for some reason my dog kept staring at the kitchen window with both ears facing toward it, ignoring any commands or questions for long periods of time. My very curious cat repeatedly kept trying to see something outside of it as well during the night. This finally jogged me back to reality, and I realized that this oppressive sensation of being watched every night, starting around 10 p.m. and continuing until dawn, was mostly originating from that kitchen window. Honestly though, the whole house had started to freak me out now. There wasn't anywhere to hide that didn't have windows except the garage or the bathroom. I took my phone and a knife with me everywhere I went from then on. I constantly checked the courtyard because every room had a door leading to it. Tonight I took my dog out, and I heard someone walking towards us from the side of the house. I called out and shone my flashlight over to where I heard it, but it stopped, and when I looked I saw nothing there. Normally I would have gone to investigate, but for some reason I had the strongest feeling that I probably shouldn't. The same thing happened later in the evening too. When I took the dog out yesterday around midnight, someone was coming across the field. They had a flashlight with them, but when they got near me they shut it off. I couldn't see them after that, and they didn't respond to any of my calling out to them. I feel like I'm in a slow-motion horror movie, but during the day and my partner's weeks off, everything is usually perfectly normal, so I really don't know what to think. I can't tell whether any of this is real or not. I don't have any close friends here. I'm planning to buy a camera and motion lights for the back when I have money next week. And I know this sounds crazy. I really don't know if that's a good idea. I think whoever this is, once I've seen them, they're going to escalate. I don't know why I think that. My partner wants me to get a concealed carry and another younger dog. This isn't known to be an unsafe area at all, but the properties are spaced pretty well. I'd like some honest advice about this, and thank you for your time. This happened about 15 years ago. At the time, I was dating around and had a few creepy encounters, but this guy takes the cake. He was an acquaintance of my brother who he had met at a bar a few times and was showing around the local area because he was new to the country. My brother had set us up because he was apparently desperate for a girlfriend, and I guess I was pretty desperate too, because we went out on a date together. Well, that date ended up being probably the worst first date I've ever been on, perhaps. I showed up to the restaurant we were supposed to be meeting at. He was very late, which wasn't a huge deal though, so I let it slip and we went to sit down. To be quite honest, I knew from the very start that I wasn't really going to be attracted to him, but I thought I should be polite and at least see if we had a nice night before writing him off entirely. He started off politely too, held the door for me, pulled my seat out. It wasn't really anything necessary, but it was a nice gesture anyway. Then, when we were sitting down waiting for someone to come and take our orders, I was reading the menu, and he started talking about how much his fiancée would have liked this place. That took me by surprise, so naturally I asked. He revealed that he had a fiancée before moving over here, but he had just left her to move to another country. I asked why they had broken up, and he said they never really had as such, but he'd gotten fed up over her nagging him about various things, and just moved away one day. Well, call me awkward, but I really didn't know what to say after that revelation, so I changed the subject and started asking him more about himself and where he used to live. He wasn't very forthcoming at all. Eventually our waiter turned up and started talking to us. To clarify the next part, our waiter was a man of color, and he had an unusual accent for our area as well. My date stared blankly at him for a while, and then turned to me and said, "You understand this guy?" I said that yes, I obviously could understand him before telling the waiter our orders. After he left, my lovely date continued to shock me. I wouldn't normally leave the ordering to the lady, but that brown guy talked really weirdly. I just couldn't get it. Wow, what a way to tell me you're a racist and a sexist in one breath, dude. Again, I was speechless for a few moments before I got really angry with him. I don't remember exactly what I said. It was something along the lines of, "Well, I'm not a lady, so I can order for myself just fine, thanks." Were the racial remarks really necessary? Then he got really annoyed and started arguing with me about being a racist. I pointed out that he wouldn't have met me if he just stuck to people he was used to in his own country. He did calm down a bit then and told me he wouldn't want that, because he was so glad he'd met me. Honestly, I found that quite weird, considering I didn't see any way to say this date was going well, but he didn't know me very well at all either. I decided since I'd ordered I should stay, get my meal, and at least try to redeem the evening before I left and never had to see this man again. I answered some of his questions about me, basic getting to know me and small talk type stuff. Then he started on about my previous dates, if I was a virgin, whether I would be willing to wait until marriage, then the submissiveness to my husband stuff or not. It was at this point I realized that I was most likely on a date with a religious bigot. Hence all this weird attitude to sexual stuff and other close-minded bullshit. I settled for a "none of your business, I think I'm gonna leave now." I checked the prices on the menu and left money for my half of the food plus a tip on the table, and got up to leave. He told me he didn't see why I was being so unreasonable with him, as though this had been a completely normal date. Then he told me I couldn't expect him to take my money because that was an insult to him. Fine, dude, you want to pay for a meal that's not getting eaten, you go for it. I'm not that mad about spending money that I'll stop you. So I took my money back and stormed straight out. I assumed that yes, it was an awful evening, but I would never have to see him again. Well, I wasn't even back to my house yet when my brother started bombarding me with texts asking where I was, because my date had called him in tears saying I'd gone off for no good reason, and he didn't know where I was or what to do. Thankfully, my brother was pretty calm about it, and assumed I at least had left for a reason. I explained everything to him, and he seemed very surprised too. After that night, we both tried to cut contact. My brother stopped meeting up with the guy, and we both blocked the Facebook account we had for him too. My brother also blocked his number, because he would just not stop texting him about me, alternating between really worried about me and saying he hoped I dropped dead. then started the endless different social media accounts to harass us. He told my brother he didn't know why we'd stopped talking to him. He posted a bunch of weird posts describing me in detail before going on to call me a lot of horrible names. We kept blocking them when they popped up and trying to move on, but then the harassment got worse. He'd either found me, followed me at some point, or got my address from a friend because he turned up one day standing around outside my house, asking to come in and speak to me. When I refused to let him in, he grabbed my arm to prevent me from going in either, and started telling me he'd never let me go, because I would never find a man who would love me like he did. If I walked away from him again, I would regret it one day when I was old and lonely. He went on and on like this for ages while I tried to pull my arm away from him. I got fed up of this and yelled at him to get off me and leave me alone. Then I kicked him right in the shin. He let go of my arm but cursed at me, saying I was being ungrateful to him. I took the opportunity to run inside and lock my door. Then this crazy fool ran up and started banging on my door trying to burst it inward. I was getting really upset by this man and super fed up with his presence in my life, so I grabbed the phone and called the police, telling them that someone was trying to break into my home. I was told someone would be with me soon, but 20 to 30 minutes later, there was no sign of them anywhere. I was getting quite upset because this man was forcing my door down, and I knew the lock was going to break soon. I called my brother who lives nearby just because I knew he would come, even though I wasn't sure if he would really be able to help much. About 15 minutes later, my brother turned up, and after a brief conversation, I couldn't quite hear outside. The pressure was gone off the door. I waited a few minutes and then texted my brother to see what was going on, and if it would be alright to look outside now. He didn't reply. The next thing I heard was the police storming up. I went outside to see what was going on. Apparently, after my initial call, they had received another call from a neighbor, saying there were two men fighting on my lawn. I guess this was my brother and the guy, since my brother looked completely out of breath and pretty shaken up, and the guy wasn't around anymore. My brother explained to the police that he had been trying to stop the man getting into my house when the man had sucker punched him. I told my side of the story, and some of my other neighbors were asked about what they had seen. They were able to tell them about his attempts to get in. Plus, there were marks on the outer side of the door where he had been repeatedly trying to break it. The police went to look for him, and a few weeks afterward I was called and told they thought they had found him. When they took me to look at the suspected person, though, it was not the same man. I didn't hear anything else about him, and I don't know what happened to him. I didn't see him again, so I'm probably safe after 15 years now. This happened to me in high school, when I was in 11th grade. I was about 16 years old. The street I lived on was in New York City, and it was a pretty small street, so you can hear anything that happens at each end of it. You can hear the kids laughing, kids falling off their bikes, etc. This is an important detail for the story. Another important detail is the house I lived in only had one front entrance to get in. The front entrance had two doors, a screen door, which was the first thing an outsider would see when they approached my house, and a wooden door. Both had locks, so no one could just open the screen door unless they had a key with them. I note this due to all the videos I watched online of people just yanking screen doors open. I was living alone for a month, and honestly it was pretty fun and mundane. My parents were living in California at that time due to work. One day, while I was on my computer doing something, there were these long, strong knocks at the screen door. I left my room and approached the front wooden door cautiously. I am an easily anxious person, and it does not help that I kept watching true crime documentary videos. The person on the other side of my door knocked on the screen door again. I peered through the peephole of the wooden door and could see this white middle-aged dude just standing there, moving his head side to side. His body was doing these little jumpy movements people do when they're standing and waiting. I decided to open the wooden door just a little bit, thinking the front screen door was going to protect me anyway. "What's wrong?" I asked him. The guy instantly responded, "There's been a car crash. Please come out here and help me. I think a kid that was riding his bike just got run over." "Where's the car crash?" I asked. The guy responded, It's down the street, over here." He pointed to one end of the street. Remember how I said the street was small and I could hear anything? Even a kid falling off his bike? I was sure as hell I would have been able to hear a fucking car crash. The second he said that, my guard immediately went up because I was quite scared. I was also really pissed off for some reason. "I don't know why you're coming to me. What do you think I'm gonna do? Call 911? The guy pushed on with what he was saying before and asked me to come out to see the car crash with him and to see if there was anything we could do to help. I remember saying, "Call 911 or I'll call them for you. They'll be able to handle this much better than I can." I closed the wooden door and locked it behind me. If you're wondering, I did not call 911. I went to my room and watched YouTube videos instead. I know, a weird thing to do, but I was trying to calm myself down. My heart was beating so fast in my chest. I kept looking at the time. I forgot what specific time it was, but I remember it being in the afternoon. The sky was bright blue at least. I waited for a few hours. When I was sure the guy would be gone, I went back to the front entrance and opened the wooden door, made sure no one was there. Then I opened the screen door to see this car crash at the end of the street. Why did I do this? I wanted to truly make sure there was nothing that had happened. I know I said I would have heard it, but I wanted to make sure just in case I was ignoring an actual thing that I just happened to somehow not hear. There was nothing there though. No kid, no crashed car, not even any debris. Just the usual street end that I was used to. At that time, I felt an immense sense of relief. It's only a few years later when I thought about this moment again and realized that guy had some malicious intention for me. Good thing I kept myself level-headed and realized there was no way there could have been a crash without me hearing. God knows what the fuck could have happened. This story takes place when I was 14 and female. Now I'm 23. It was late summer and I was coming home from hanging out at the beach for my best friend Mia's 17th birthday party. When I got off the subway at my stop, I looked at the bus arrival screen. Now the bus I would normally take home was arriving in an hour or so. Being a tired 14-year-old girl, I decided it might be a better idea to take an alternate bus route home. This was a decision I would come to later regret. When I got off the bus at the stop, I had about a 10-minute walk to my building. My area at night was pretty quiet, not many cars around on the streets or anything. But as I'm walking up the street, I hear the sound of an engine nearby. I look over my left shoulder and see a white panel van. I know, how typical. Rolling slowly up the street. I tried to think nothing of it, but when I turned on to my street, the van followed right behind me. I began to become unsettled and started walking faster. The van was driving slowly behind me and never once passed me by. When I turned up the long driveway to my building, the van once again turned too. Now I was really scared. The driveway to my building has an ice rink on the side of it with bright lights, so I walked beside the rink under those bright lights. There are small town houses on the other side of the driveway. The van caught up to me and stopped. I thought maybe this person might be lost or something, or trying to ask for directions. I was trying to find any way to rationalize this somehow. I stopped and stayed about 4 feet away from the van just in case. I looked into the van window to see an older man, starting to bald with black hair and a white t-shirt. I asked them if they were lost, but they didn't respond. Instead, they tried to convince me to get into their van. I said no, obviously, and started walking away, but the van started to drive slowly, following along behind me once again. When a red car began to drive down the driveway, the van drove all the way to the end of it and waited for the red car to turn out before reversing to be beside me again. At this point, the man was still trying to get me to get into the van. I wanted to make a mad dash to my building, but I was worried he would see where I lived, so I kept on walking. When another car came down the driveway, the van did exactly what it did before again, drove to the end and waited for the car to leave. This time, though, there was a cab dropping someone off at the town houses. The cabbie was closing his trunk when out of the corner of his eye he saw me. "Hey, are you okay?" he called out to me. I told him how the van had been following me, and how every time a car came by, the van drove to the end and waited for it to leave before following me again. The cabbie told me he would get in his car, drive to the end of the driveway, and sit there for a bit so I had enough time to run to my building. I told him okay and thanked him. The van was back in line with me once again. The cabbie follows his word and gets into his cab, and drives all the way up the driveway. The van follows close behind. I look to see the two vehicles sitting there, and I run up the rest of the driveway into my building's lobby. My heart was racing. When I get to my apartment, I was still freaked out. I went into my room and called the cops right away. While I was on the phone with them, I looked out my bedroom window to see if I could see the van. I saw it slowly driving around my building in circles, apparently searching for me. Now I was fully panicking. The cops sent officers to sweep the area eventually, but they didn't end up finding him. 2 officers came to my apartment to get a statement from me. About a week after this happened, the officers came back once again. They showed me a photo of the man from the van that they were able to get from the security camera on the side of the building. I told them that that was indeed the man in the photo that had followed me. They told me they'd found him and that he was being put on the sex offender list. So I guess all's well that ends well in the end. So I live in a not-so-great area in Cleveland, Ohio. This story happened to me about 3 weeks ago now, when I was homebound from work because I was quite sick. I was sitting in my kitchen eating some cereal when I noticed a black van parked on the opposite street of my house. There were 3 people sitting inside, but I just assumed it had something to do with one of my neighbors. I keep my house dead-bolted shut anyways, and I have both a gun and an alarm system, so I wasn't too worried about it. I was watching YouTube on my phone when it rang suddenly with an unknown number. I picked it up, asking who it was, and was met with the voice of a woman. "Is this my name?" I said yes, and she kept talking, telling me that my girlfriend's name had been in a bad car crash and was severely injured. She told me I needed to come as quickly as possible, as I may not have a lot of time left before she died. Well, understandably, after hearing that, I sort of became manic. I grabbed my car keys and wallet and ran to my car to start driving to the hospital. I got about halfway down the street when I realized that they hadn't even said what hospital it was. I tried to call the number again, but this time they didn't pick up. I copied and pasted that number into the Google search too, and no hospital came up either, just a bunch of random shit and websites. I tried calling my girlfriend next. She picked up immediately. It was embarrassing, but I was crying, asking her what happened and if she was really going to be okay. She told me she was fine, and when I mentioned the hospital, she was quite confused and had no idea what I was talking about. I was really confused and couldn't really process what was happening, but I turned around midway and decided to go home. Well, just as I was getting into view of my house, I saw that same black van parked backwards into my driveway. It wasn't quite fully clicking right away in my dumbass brain what was happening, but I knew well enough that they had no reason to be there in my driveway. When I drove past, there was only one dude in the car now. The other 2 were literally right at my front door, which I had forgotten to lock in my panic when I ran out to my car. They were all wearing beanies and face masks, so it was hard to actually see what they looked like beside their eyes. When they saw me pull next to their van, the 2 started running back over to my car, and we all started having an intense shouting match. It was basically me screaming, "What the fuck are you doing parked in my driveway?" and them yelling for me to shut the fuck up. We kept doing that back and forth when one of them flashed a pistol at me and threatened to shoot me. As soon as I saw the gun, I floored my gas pedal and fumbled to dial 911 as I drove. I could see them pulling out in my rear view, driving in the opposite direction out of the neighborhood. The police came soon after, and I gave them a description of the van and the clothes they were wearing. I also managed to memorize about half of their license plate, but I doubt those were real plates anyways. I had so much adrenaline pumping through my body that I was actually physically shaking. I filed a report with them, but I haven't heard back since. That just kinda seems to be the way it is around here, sadly. Either way, I was really startled because not only did they know where I lived, but obviously they were the caller as well, and somehow knew my name, my girlfriend's name, and that I was going to be home from work. That sure as shit scared the hell out of me, and now I've bought a Ring doorbell system. I also triple check my doors are locked every time I leave the house now. I pray to God some shit like that never happens to me again, because it was so horrifying. And to those people who tried robbing my house and even threatened to kill me, I hope we never fucking meet again. Okay, so I will preface this by saying that these events happened exactly 20 years ago, pretty much to the day. I'll also mention that this could come across as slightly anticlimactic, as it doesn't end with a dead body or imprisonment or something like that. It is, however, true and accurate as I can remember it, at least. Sorry if this comes across as rambling at times as well. So, to start off, it was not long before my 9th birthday. I was a shy, very introverted kid who only had very few friends. Therefore, I was really eager to impress the friends I did have. I mean, a few friends are better than none, right? This story involves my closest friend at the time, whose name was Damon. Being so shy, I would never really turn up to any parties or social events. I just couldn't really face it. But it did worry me that this would eventually cause me to lose the few friendships I did have. You can imagine my horror when my dad picked me up from the school gates and Damon's mother picked him up at the same time, and then asked me right on the spot, "Hey, Damon and his brother are going to insert name of caravan park this weekend. Would you like to come too?" For those unfamiliar, a caravan holiday in the UK is just a cheap couple of days in a huge field full of trailers with a tacky nearby entertainment and amusements. On the spot and terrified of being seen as rude, I accepted right away. Come Friday evening, I was sat in the car in the back between Damon and his little brother Lucas, who was 2 years younger than us. It was only really a short car ride there, but it all felt so uncomfortable and alien to me, floating through dark back streets I had never seen before, as the wind and rain lashed at the windshield wipers while they tried their best to keep up. When we arrived, it was already quite late. We watched some crap on TV and went right to bed. I had one of those old brick Nokia phones that you could play Snake on, that I promised I would text my dad on to let him know I was okay, which I did as soon as I got there. The strong gale swayed the caravan that night as I fell into an uneasy sleep. The next day we hit the shops to spend our pocket money. Then in the afternoon we went to the entertainment with Damon and Lucas's parents. It was just a bunch of awful live acting with clowns and such nonsense. I may have been 8, but I wasn't a baby. Later on, though, at around 8 p.m., the adult entertainment settled in. Some comedian of some repute. Me, Damon, and Lucas were absolutely bored stiff by the act. Damon and I wanted to just head back to the caravan, watch some South Park, and look at the cool new stuff we'd bought earlier. I saw Damon ask his parents for permission, who were happily drinking away and chatting to other parents, and as a child, it seemed swapping life stories. Eventually, they gave Damon the keys to the caravan, which was about a 5-minute walk away, but instructed us to take Lucas along with. We snatched up the keys and headed out. We walked for about 2 minutes in the cold and dark, mindlessly chatting about our eyeball rings we bought earlier at the gift shop, and saying how they automatically give you a super hard punch or something. Just stupid 8-year-old chat stuff. We noticed, though, that in between 2 of the caravans, there was a white van. I know, how typical. With its back doors wide open. We thought nothing of it, though. Maybe someone had just arrived and were unloading their stuff. That was completely wrong, though. As we walked by the van, a man suddenly emerged from the pitch blackness and began to approach us very slowly. It was quite an abnormal walk as well. I remember it being almost like how you would skulk in the dark, being careful not to stand on anything. Strangely though, we didn't actually get too worried until the man began to speak. He stared at us for a few moments, but didn't smile or otherwise physically acknowledge us at all. All of a sudden though, while staring past us, he blurted out an enthusiastic, "All right, boys, can one of you strong lads help me shift this heavy box into the back of my van? I've hurt my back quite badly, you see." Back then, stranger danger wasn't as commonly spoken about as it is today, but I absolutely knew something about this was not right. His walk, his voice, his eyes. I had a million thoughts running through about 10 seconds. What could I do in this situation? Call my dad? He's miles away. Scream for help? There's no one in these caravans. They're all by the entertainment. Fight him? Yeah, right. I thought things couldn't get any worse. I was wrong. As Damon and I stood frozen, his younger brother naively piped up, "Yeah, okay, I'm strong." He started marching toward this guy who was only about 15 feet away from us. I'll never forget that horrid look on his face when he saw Lucas walking toward him, like a spider that had just caught a fly. I heard Damon let out a broken screech. "Lucas, no!" It's at this point I'm ashamed to say I continued walking the way we were originally meant to go, and quite fast. I couldn't watch this. What was I going to do if he murdered Lucas right in front of me? What if he came and grabbed me next? The only thing I could think to do was walk away quickly and try to find someone, anyone who could help us. About 10 seconds later, Damon and Lucas came sprinting up from behind me, shouting "Run," and run we did. Oh, how we ran. I don't know how Damon got Lucas away. I don't know even if the man chased us. I don't know what he wanted with us. But I do have a few ideas. As we approached the caravan, I began to feel semi-rational again. As we began to catch our breath, I remember saying something to Damon along the lines of, "Why couldn't we just run back to the entertainment area to get our parents?" Damon replied with something like, "What, run towards him? Are you stupid?" It was a good point, but I was too busy trying not to cry to say anything else. As Damon fumbled around with his keys at the caravan door, for some reason or another, the keys just did not work as we tried all of them. We tried turning them in all directions, pushing and pulling while hoping and praying. I can clearly picture in my mind being stood there in that dark night with Damon and Lucas, in fear, the key halfway hanging out of the lock, the confusion. But most of all, I remember Damon looking straight at me after turning bright red with puffy eyes and bursting into tears because he realized what I would then realize seconds later. We had to go back. Strangely, Lucas was the only one not crying. I think he was too young to understand the danger we were all in. After deciding that we were just in as much danger standing there as we would be going back, we headed back towards Damon's parents. I've never run that fast in the 20 years since then, and I dare say Damon would say the same. About halfway there, we heard the most disgusting, primal wail you can imagine. It was about 5 seconds long, and it sounded like a mixture of anger and pain. We never stopped though, just made brief eye contact and kept going. Had the man just killed someone? Or was the man screaming because he knew we had gotten away? We would never know. We burst through the entertainment area doors and sprinted toward Damon's parents, who were blissfully unaware of the horrors that had just occurred. I remember his mother staring at us wide-eyed with her mouth open as we all burst into floods of tears. Half because of the trauma and half because of the relief. I felt so warm and safe there. We tried to explain in young babble and gibberish, but I'm not sure we got our point across. The next morning, I asked to just go straight home. I don't truly understand what happened that night. I don't know who he was, what he wanted, why he screamed, or why he was even there. But like I said, I do have my theories. Thankfully, no one was killed that night in the caravan park, because nobody else was around to scream. This is gonna be a long one, since I've never managed to really put the whole story together clearly until now. This happened in a relatively small town/city in Canada in April of 2016, just before I graduated high school. I was around 17 at the time. It was my grad year, and most of the people in my grad class were partying, planning activities to celebrate our upcoming graduation. One of the traditions in my town is to play a grad game called Rambo, which is basically a version of Predator Prey. A bunch of people would meet up at a specific location on one side of the city, and the goal was for the runners to make it to a spot on the other side of the city without getting caught by the seekers, which were groups of 3 to 4 in their cars. Runners also went in groups of 3 to 4, but they had to be on foot. My grad class was around 200 people, and I would say this particular night there were about 60 to 70 people playing. This takes place after it's completely dark outside. I think it was about 11 p.m. at night. I had planned to be a runner in a group of 4 with my boyfriend at the time, as well as my friend and her boyfriend. However, my now ex bailed at the last minute to go do drugs at a different party with his friends, which left me as a weird third wheel with my friend and her man. No problem, right? I never should have gone. Now, for reference, I'm pretty tiny. Like, I'm 4'11" and weighed around 80 pounds at the time. I genuinely look like I'm around 13 if I don't wear makeup, and you don't get a good look at me. Anyway, my friend and I got all dressed up in black, and put war paint on our cheeks. The 3 of us headed to the spot. I live in what I've always considered to be a very safe town, mostly full of families and retired people. There are only a few bad-ish neighborhoods in the city. The game started, and we all ran. It was all fun and games until about an hour in, and around midnight, we had to cross through one of said neighborhoods. While we were walking along a residential street sidewalk, one of the seeker cars came ripping down the street and the 3 of us ran. Of course, my friend and her man stayed together, and I got separated somehow in the scuffle. Once the seekers weren't in the immediate area, I started calling out to my friends. I could hear their voices somewhere far off in the distance. I texted my friend. She said they were in an alley on the other side of the houses, while I was still on the sidewalk out front. I had 2 options. I could walk to the end of the block and find the alley that way, but I was about 20 houses away in either direction, and I knew for a fact that there were seekers nearby who had seen us, and knew we were in the area. My other option was to cut through someone's yard, and immediately be in the alley and reunite with my group. I chose the latter. Why I did this, I'll never know. Like I said, I am a tiny little girl, and this was known to be a fairly rough neighborhood. I looked at the nearest houses and spotted one that didn't have a front gate. His lawn went straight into the backyard, save for a few shrubs on the side of the house. I thought this might mean I could just go straight through, and there wouldn't be a back fence either. I chose this house, and stepped over the shrubs and jogged towards the back. As I did, a motion light came on that illuminated the backyard. This scared me, but I was already in, so I figured I should just get out as fast as possible. When the light came on, however, I noticed that there was, in fact, a fence, and about a 6 to 7 foot tall one at that. I certainly couldn't jump it, but there was a gate with a latch that I ran to. I remember having to stand on my tippy toes to even reach it. While fumbling with this latch, I heard a noise. It was the sound of the back door of the house opening. The houses in this area were quite small, and often dilapidated. I would say that the back door was only around 15 feet away from the fence. It had some concrete stairs with wrought iron railings. I remember turning my head towards the noise, and having around 1 second to see this giant bald man in his stained white briefs charging at me from his door. He was 6'5" and well over 300 pounds. He hit me like a freight train. He slammed into me so that I hit the fence hard. I think he came at me with his hands neck height, but I can't remember for sure. What I do remember vividly, though, was how he picked me up, my full body weight by my neck. I remember trying to shriek, and hearing my own voice barely choking out a sound. He immediately started towards the door he came from. As he dragged me towards his house, I remember being sure that something horrific was going to happen to me, and that I was going to die. I remember his hairy, sweaty body absorbing my kicks and attempts to hit him. I was screaming the whole time, but with his hands around my neck. It was an unescapable, silencing death trap. Right in front of his steps, my iPhone flew out of my hoodie pocket and hit the concrete, reminding me of its existence altogether, but but now it was sitting on the ground as he hauled me up the stairs. I don't know how I mustered the strength, but that wrought iron railing gave me something to finally leverage myself against. I managed to pull away from his grasp using that fence, just long enough to grab my phone. His hand slipped off my neck but caught my hoodie's neckline, which tore down to my sternum. I was wearing another shirt underneath. This hoodie is still the grim reminder of this day. For some reason, I just can't throw it away. He immediately caught me again, but in my mind, I was for sure going to die if I didn't have my phone to somehow call for help or something. Being out of his grasp allowed for another thing. I could scream. I knew my friends were somewhere in that back alley, and I screamed bloody murder at the top of my lungs once I could. He caught me again and dragged me into his house. I vaguely remember him trying to cover my mouth or grab my throat again, but I'm not sure. Upon entering his house, I saw where he was taking me. The steps into his pitch-black basement were only about 4 feet from his back door, and he was headed straight for it. I was certain I was going to be dragged into his rape dungeon, and no one would ever see me again. The freak had 1 foot down the stairs when he heard it. Before his back door fully shut, there came a sound from the outside that saved my life. It was my friend calling my name. They heard me screaming, and were very close to the yard I was in, so naturally they started freaking out and calling my name. This guy heard them. He froze in his tracks, eyes fixed out the back door now. He realized I wasn't alone. All at once he let go of me and stepped out in front of the door, blocking my escape back through it. But then he started asking me all sorts of questions like he was in a frenzy. Why were you in my yard? You were stealing and vandalizing, weren't you? I was pretty messed up, but started trying to explain the game we were playing, referring heavily to the fact that I was with a group of friends and just trying to cut through his yard. It was now that I got a good look at him, completely naked aside from some stained, sacky white briefs. After about 30 seconds, my friends called my phone. I've never picked up a call so fast. I immediately started yelling at her that I'm in someone's house and he's trying to kidnap me, what the house looked like, etc. I stayed away from him and stayed on the phone with my friend, all the while he was screaming at me that he was performing a civilian's arrest for vandalizing his property. He repeatedly threatened to call the police, to which I said please do every time. The police would get me out of his house real fast. He never did call them, but he made me write my name on a piece of paper, which I did because I just wanted him to let me go. He kept me in his house seemingly trying to figure out what to do, until around 2 minutes later there was violent banging on his front door. My friends had found his house, and were just going to town on his door. Then he finally let me go out the back. I promptly threw up on his front lawn from nerves as soon as I was reunited with my friends, my gift to him. So the final part of this story happened in 2008. I met my first serious boyfriend when I was 15 in secondary school, 2005. We ended up being together for about 2.5 years. We were in the same year, myself being only 3 months older than him. We clicked with each other's friend groups quite well, so everyone tended to hang out with very few issues in between us. A few months into the relationship, though, some small red flags started to appear. Another guy tried talking to me once, to which my boyfriend threatened him. This landed him in detention, as it happened during school time. This was just the first of many times, though, that I began to see a very scary side of him. The other occurrences weren't massive, but in hindsight, they really were an indication of things to come. First was him smashing his bedroom window because I didn't want to go and get drunk with him one night. Him throwing drinks over me. When he started to rear his ugly side even more, he pinned me against a wall because one of his friends sat next to me on a sofa at a party. Thankfully, his friends pulled him off of me and gave him a stern talking to, but it was put down in the end of just having too much to drink and immediately forgotten about. Some time goes by and we briefly split up because he began taking a lot of drugs, mainly ecstasy and speed. I didn't really want to be having anything to do with all of that, meaning we spent a lot less free time together. So, in the end, I called it a day. We had been apart for about a month before getting back together in the end, during which time I had been casually chatting with someone else, which didn't really go anywhere. One morning, while we were still in bed, he got a text from a local friend and went to meet them, leaving me in his bed at his house. His mom, stepdad, and sister were all out. After about 5 minutes, I got up and went to use the bathroom when I heard his car screech to a halt outside. I could hear his front door fling open and smash into the wall and him pounding up the stairs. I could hear him breathing heavily, like he was almost growling. The bathroom door was locked, but it was only a frail wooden door. It didn't take him much time to smash it open. He screamed at me about how I'd been talking to someone else while we were split up, and how could I, despite the fact he had been with someone else hooking up in his friend circle. I explained to him that it was only texting, and that we were split up, but all that fell on deaf ears. He went on to rip my vest top strap and rip my boots, and then told me to get out and walk home, which was 5 miles away. I live in the UK in a very quiet area. There tends to be a small village, then like a mile stretch of quiet road, then another village and another mile stretch of road, so on and so on. So I'm walking back on the first part of the quiet road with my top hanging off me, and my boots flapping all over the place as they'd been ripped, when I hear his car pull up alongside me. There was no way I was dealing with him again, so I jumped over a hedge and hid. I remember getting scratched up from the brambles, but I just didn't care. I crouched behind this hedge, hoping he'd just disappear. I heard his car begin driving up and down that road multiple times before he gave in. I figured then it was safe. I ignored all of his calls and luckily made it home safe, running most of the rest of the way. I'd received several messages from him apologizing and telling me how he'd kill himself, but I just didn't really care at that point. After some time, he finally left me alone, and I just concentrated on college and spending time with true friends. I really wished that was the end of my interactions with him, but of course it was not. I was on a night out in the local town with my friends. I had put my ex to the very back of my mind, as it had now been several months without hearing or seeing anything of him. There I was, minding my own business, dancing away, when he just suddenly appeared out of nowhere. He tried to talk to me, which I did acknowledge, but I was not really in the mood for it, so I immediately left to go to the toilets near the exit and decide how to best handle this situation. One of my friends was working at the local Asda that night, and I knew they finished in about an hour, so I decided that I'd leave the club and walk to Asda and wait for them to get off. I knew it'd take about 15 to 20 minutes to get there. In hindsight, this was a really fucking stupid idea, but I just really wanted to get away from him. I peered out of the toilet, and although it was busy, I couldn't see him anywhere. So far, so good. I quickly ran to the cloakroom and handed in my ticket to get my coat back. I shoved it on and ran out the door. There were people outside smoking and just hovering about chatting. I glanced around nervously as I walked through. I still didn't see him, so I figured it was fine for me to dash off. About 10 minutes into my walk, though, I started feeling very uneasy. I didn't know why, I was just suddenly full of dread. I turned around, and about 30 feet behind me was my ex, following me, eyes locked on me, not saying a word. He had this evil look on his face. He must have been waiting for me to come out of the toilets, or clocked me getting my coat or something, and kept a small distance behind me the entire time. It was well past 12 a.m. now. The roads were dead because of the time, and there were no nearby houses. I realized in this moment just how badly I had fucked up. I texted my friend quickly, telling her about what's happening, where I am, and where I was trying to go. She tried to call, but I canceled it, as I didn't want him knowing I'd alerted people to whatever this situation was going to turn into. I started to pick up my pace, and I could clearly hear that he was doing so as well. Ahead of me, like out of a horror movie, was an underground pass. It was a walkway that went under the main road and brought you out into the Asda car park. I had to either run through this 100-yard dimly lit tunnel or turn around and face him. I decided fuck it and sprinted through the tunnel. After all, Asda was open on the other side. There would for sure be someone in that car park. They had a 24-hour petrol station and a cash point too, which many people stopped to use. I bolted through. This is when he started to shout at me. You fucking this, you fucking that, the usual. I got through the tunnel, and I was so relieved to finally see Asda all lit up, knowing there were several people inside. I noticed a youngish guy on a moped not too far from the entrance. I let down my guard, figuring that I'd be left alone now that someone else was visible. But I was wrong. So very wrong. The next thing I know, I'm being grabbed by my hair. He yanks my phone out of my hand and smashes it on the floor. I start shouting. The moped guy sees us and legs it into the store. Great. Crazy X here starts pulling me backward toward the underpass. I start noping and panicking real hard. If he got me to that underpass, I was screwed. So with all my might, I swung up and punched him as hard as I could in the face. It was then that I remembered he still had a hold of my hair as he ripped a gigantic clump of it out. He grabbed me again, picking me up by the throat, only to throw me to the floor. I cut up my hands and knees. He was now screaming at me, calling me a bitch for hitting him. At this point, I started to hear shouting, and to my relief, it was getting closer by the second. Turns out the guy on the moped had went to alert staff of the situation outside. A variety of people were now running out to help me, including a security guard, several staff members, and even a customer. My ex tried to run, but he was caught very swiftly. The staff in Asda rang up the police, who were on their way already. I saw my friend and just collapsed into her arms like a baby. Thankfully, the police were there about 5 minutes later. They arrested him and took me to the station to make a statement. They had to take photos of all my injuries, inflicted by someone I had once loved. Bruises, grazes, cuts, a huge patch of missing hair. I felt embarrassed and ashamed. I remember, though, the police officer being very friendly and trying to lighten the mood at least. What happened after was all a blur. I shut myself away and developed bad anxiety and panic attacks due to everything that happened. I remember an officer visiting me telling me about a court date. I didn't attend in the end. In hindsight, I should have, but I couldn't face him in those evil eyes. I didn't want to remember the fear I felt looking at him. I just wanted it to all go away. It was in the local paper that week. Details of his court date, etc. I was told he'd been put in an anger management program and had started counseling. He was forced to face what he was, which I'm glad of, as he was a monster. Even though I haven't seen him since then, I wish to never again. Several years ago, I was taking care of my father's place while he was vacationing in Montreal. There was only myself and my sister at the house during the time, and after a fine meal, she had retired to her room. I, however, decided to watch television lazily on the leather couch. I felt myself drifting off to sleep, though, when the doorbell suddenly rang. I glanced up at the living room clock and thought to myself, who on earth could that be at 11:30 in the evening? I looked through the front window, which had a clear view of the front steps and door. There stood a scraggly-looking fellow, rather untidy in appearance with shaggy blonde hair, an unshaven face, and glasses. Despite initially giving pause to the time of night, I didn't really think much of it at the time and proceeded to the front door to at least greet the stranger. I answered his knock politely, asking, "Hello, can I help you?" He simply asked if James was home. Backstory time. Several years ago, there was a dude named James who did stay with my dad. He worked at the same company as my father, but lived in New York. Well, he and my father had struck an arrangement that he would stay at my dad's house during the week, while going back to his family in New York during the weekends. However, at the time of my story, he had long since retired from that company and moved back to New York permanently. Normally, I'd be a pretty cautious dude, but the context of this previous story made me drop my guard a little bit. In hindsight, creepy guy asking for a fairly popular name should have been the first red flag, though. Not thinking much of his request, I told him that James no longer lived here. The creepy guy thanked me and went on his way. As he made his way down the steps, though, I noticed his light brown Cadillac had out-of-plate states. I left it at that once he drove off down the street, though. Locking the door behind me, I flopped back down on the couch and continued my late-night zoning out on the Discovery Channel. I began to fall asleep again, while another episode of Wild Discovery was starting up, when once again the doorbell rang. I didn't need to look up at the clock to realize that it was well past midnight. Glancing quickly out the front window, I saw it was that same fellow who had asked for James 30 minutes earlier. My first red flag. As I approached the door carefully, my mind began to worry a little. So as I unbolted the deadlock and opened the door, I made sure to keep my foot pressed on it just in case. Once again, I politely asked, "Hello, how can I help you?" He shuffled his feet about and began to tell his tall tale. I know this is gonna sound a little bit weird, but a few years ago I was doing construction in this area, and I noticed there was this real beautiful woman who lived here. She had a beautiful pair of white shoes. I was wondering if perhaps I could have them? My mind began to race. True enough, there was construction going on in the area here a few years ago, as the neighborhood had just recently been developed. But there was no woman living here several years ago. My father was the first owner of this house, and he and my mother had long been divorced, not to mention that my mom lived in another country. My father hadn't even had any girlfriends until fairly recently. In fact, that's why he was in Montreal, to spend time with his girlfriend, who would end up being his future wife. I answered him truthfully that there was no woman living here now, and there never had been. Those shoes in question would probably not be found in my house. He insisted, though. But they were the most beautiful pair of white shoes. I really want them. I'll buy them off you. Here, I have... He cut himself off to search in his pockets, which only produced about $10. I shook my head, but then he continued to ask. Please, man, I'll give you the money. Just let me inside and let me look for those shoes. I really need to have them. Hey, look, man, the shoes you're looking for aren't here, so I think you better leave, I said firmly, and began to close the door. Alarm bells were going off in my head, and I knew I had to stop this before things got any weirder. As I began to close the door in what felt like slow motion, I saw him moving his arms forward in an attempt to block me from closing it. I slammed it shut, though, and locked the deadbolt as quickly as I could. I heard him turning the doorknob, trying to force open the door. Once he realized that shit just wasn't gonna happen, though, I heard him tear down the steps. As I ran through the front window to try to get his license plate number, he had already started the car and begun to peel off. I was too late. By this point, adrenaline had kicked in already, and I began searching the house for a weapon. Even though there were several decorative swords hiding on the wall, I decided to go for my trusty golf driver as I went around the house making sure all the possible entrances were locked. After waking my sister and quickly telling her the situation, I then called the police. Once they arrived, I told them what had happened, and after the officer did his police thing, he ended our conversation with, "Well, that's the weirdest damn story I've ever heard." Every once in a while, when I close my eyes, I can see that man's face and hands moving towards my own face, trying to thwart the closing of the door and ruining whatever devious plans he had for the evening. I sometimes wonder what might have been if I hadn't been cautious, if I hadn't been wary about a stranger in the middle of the night, if I had bought his strange story about the white shoes, if he had managed to get his arm into the doorway. But I never wonder for too long. I'm just thankful for things turning in my favor as opposed to his. As one might imagine, this event greatly influenced my own habits and behaviors. Doors and windows always locked and secured, cautiousness about opening my door at night. Hell, just unexpected knocks on the door at any time of day will give me pause. My perspective of what's scary has drastically changed. So it's not that I'm afraid exactly. I've just come to realize fully how lucky my sister and I were that night, and while things worked out in the end for us, why allow that opportunity for things to go wrong ever again by not addressing a few simple things requiring just a few bits of diligence? Sometimes when I think back on this story, I'll try and do some research to see if any similar events, curious crimes, or perhaps even anything more deviant happened in the area around the same time frame. But my research and Google always comes up short. I guess it's probably for the best in the end. I've just recently discovered this subreddit, and I have a story to share that has really traumatized me for quite a while now. I feel like this is a good place to share with. A lot, if not all of the posts I've read here are American or Canadian, so for context, it's important that I start with saying that I'm from Aotearoa, New Zealand. We do have the odd missing person or scary case here and there, but otherwise it's very generally safe here and not very much happens. What I mean is that it's safe in a way that as a 19-year-old girl, I would feel very comfortable to walk the streets at night or go on hikes alone, because I'm pretty sure that everyone's going to look out for one another generally. This event happened in the summer of 2019. I'll link a location so you can better understand, and hopefully some photos I can find online as well if I can. On this day, my boyfriend and I were headed out to a picnic date to a spot we had visited before plenty of times, Karakiriki Track. It's at the very end of a very long, windy rural farm road off the state highway. So you drive for like 15 to 20 minutes maybe from the main road, down a long farm stretch. At the end is a large cul-de-sac and a surrounding massive farm. The owners of the farm have left the land kind of open to the public as a reserve because there are native trees and other things, and because about a 15-minute walk from the cul-de-sac, there's a small waterfall you can swim in. This track is really popular as it's one of the closest swimming spots to the nearest city, Hamilton. It's also really scenic. You cross footbridges, pass by beautiful creek beds, etc. The farmers still go through every now and then to do their farm work, and there are fenced-off areas as well that the public is not allowed to enter, as they still actively work with the land in these parts. This particular day, my boyfriend and I were super happy because it was empty in the parking lot and it was a super hot summer's day, so that was really rare. The farmer was crossing the cows through the gate on a quad as we arrived. He smiled and gave us a friendly wave. He was an older man, and we had spoken several times before as we were regular visitors. We set off towards the waterfall. We crossed one footbridge and passed through a big paddock of cows. The track is quite narrow and the creek is right off the edges, so you have to be careful walking by. We saw the waterfall and decided against swimming as we had no towels. We headed back towards the car park instead. Now on our way back, we decided to go down a little bit of a steep gravel off-ramp on the track that led to a more private, tree-covered area right by the creek. Here's where it starts. We were kissing and whatnot. I was laying on my tummy reading a book, and my boyfriend was sitting up playing on his phone. He was rubbing my back and playing with my hair. We had been there for about 10 minutes before I turned and glanced up the gravel path. Way up, even further on a hill through one of the farmer's forbidden gates, I saw a big man on a quad bike who I didn't recognize as one of the farmers. After all, there was only an old couple who worked the land there. He was just sitting there staring at my boyfriend and I. I don't even want to think about how long he had been there before we noticed. I told my boyfriend, and as soon as the guy saw we were both looking at him, he opened the gate and started heading down. Now, both of us got up immediately to leave, as we didn't want to have a conversation with a farmer about us getting freaky on his land, which is what we both assumed would happen. But it was so much worse than that. This guy came down the gravel track and ran his quad right through the creek. He left it there running in the water and jumped off. He started talking to himself, saying things like, fuck, I've messed up my quad now. Now I fucked my engine. Over and over before he even got near us. My boyfriend and I were gathering our things to leave at this point when he started to beeline straight towards us. He didn't even make small talk, which was really strange because he went straight into saying, "Hey, have you guys seen any fish? I'm looking for some fish to kill." My boyfriend told the guy there were no fish in the creek at all as it was fresh water. He was probably best off to maybe try and catch some eel or something. This sent the guy into a random fit of rage. He started yelling, "I don't want no fucking eel, I want some fish!" I had made it a point to not look the guy in the eyes directly, as I didn't want to draw the conversation towards myself because I was already extremely freaked out, and I didn't want him to notice that. My boyfriend is much more of a calm and strong type when it comes to stuff like this. For a second though, I did look at the guy. I thought he looked like his face was slightly deformed, possible Bell's palsy, as I work in aged care and I've seen that look quite a lot. It was quite similar. I bent down to tie my shoe up, and when I was standing back up, that's when I saw a pistol on the man's waist. Now listen to me close. This was the first and last time in my entire life that I had ever seen a real firearm. It's incredibly hard to get one in New Zealand, especially after the regulations following the mass shooting in Christchurch. And not only that, he had one pistol on his belt and was waving another about in his hand randomly while he talked to my boyfriend about wanting to kill some fish. He would aim it down to the creek every now and then, swinging it around on his finger. My boyfriend gave me a stern look. Stern is the best word for it, because the look spoke a million things to me in that moment. He nodded his head toward the gravel hill leading back to the track. I grabbed the 2 bags we had, fake-checked my phone, and told the man that our families were waiting for us back at the car park. He completely ignored what I said though, and instead said something random like, "Hey, that's a cool hat you've got on there," or something that was completely irrelevant. I dismissed myself and said goodbye, and made my way over to the hill. In my mind, I didn't want to look back and see my boyfriend be shot and then a gun pointed at my head or something. I knew that our best bet was me getting up this hill onto the narrow path he couldn't ride his quad down, and sprinting to the farmer's house. As I was walking up the hill, I heard the guy yell out to my boyfriend, "Hey, that's a really pretty girl you've got there." It was like all the intentions of his I didn't want to believe were immediately confirmed. I felt like I would die. My boyfriend, though, said a quick "thank you, we'll be off now," and headed up the hill with me. The guy kept talking on, though, like the conversation had never ended, even though we were far away and headed off now. He stood there with his gun in his hand, watching us leave. As soon as we were around the corner, we sprinted all the way back to where the car park was. There were a bunch of empty bullet casings everywhere. We had run into 2 girls in bikinis just arriving at the spot as we did, and we informed them about everything. They got in their cars and left immediately. We tried to go to the farmer's house to ask if they knew the guy, as we had never seen him on the land before, but they were not home anymore. As for the gun, it was quite freaky for me, as I had never seen one before. The pistol looked quite old and rusty, and when we discussed the incident on the way home, my boyfriend suggested that maybe it had been handed down to him from someone else. This happened when I was very young. I like to think I was about 13 at the time, but I'm not 100% sure. What I am sure of, though, is that I was an only child and both of my parents worked at the time. It was way too often that I was home by myself, even before I was actually old enough to legally be allowed home alone. Because of this, my parents had this whole system. I had a key to the door and I would arrive home from school. I really enjoyed canned pasta, so that was something I could make for myself and have for dinner in case my parents wouldn't be home in time to make it, which normally was the case. If someone ever came to the door, I was to pretend like I wasn't home at all. If anyone called, I would let the answering machine pick it up instead. This was before the days of voicemail. If it was my parents, I would pick it up and talk to them. Otherwise, I would just do my very best to not bring any attention to the fact I was home by myself. This arrangement worked for me for a while, at least before the incident I'm mentioning in this story. I was walking home from school as usual, but this was a day that I was hurrying my best to get home as quickly as I could. The sky was already dark out, and it was getting very windy outside. I wanted to do my best to make sure I didn't get caught out in the rain. I always hated when that happened, and I hadn't brought an umbrella with me that day. I did make it home just as it was beginning to sprinkle, but in the end I got in before I really got too wet. The problem that I now had was that it was very dark inside the house because it was so dark out, and I really needed to get my homework going. Normally when I needed some light, I would just turn on the light in the foyer. It was the only light that made sense when I was not trying to call attention to the fact that anyone was home. An hour or two went by as I was doing my work. I had a pretty good focus, so I was pretty deep into the studying. That was when I heard a weird creaking noise. It was odd and not something I had heard around the house before. I looked around the room trying to determine what exactly it was, but it was a momentary distraction and I figured it was probably just as simple as the house settling in or something. I was sitting there on the couch doing my homework with my book in my lap. Hell, I even remember what I was reading about. It was psychology. We were supposed to be doing a report on a subject we thought we would want to have as a career. I don't know why, but for some reason, I suddenly got the urge to look up at the front door. The couch was directly facing it. When I looked up there, I noticed the strangest thing. I couldn't immediately make out what was wrong, but as my eyes slowly adjusted to the light and the distance, I felt myself go cold inside. The mail slot on the front door was open, and I could see someone looking through it watching me. It was the strangest, creepiest thing, and I had no idea how to react. Their eyes were perfectly lined up with mine. I don't know how long that lasted. What I do know, however, was that it was 10 minutes since I'd heard the creaking noise, which I knew now had to be this person opening up the mail slot. Furthermore, whoever was looking at me now knew I was home alone. I didn't know what to do, but I guess my body instinctively did or something. Inexplicably, I yelled out, "Hey Dad, someone's watching me through the door." Immediately, the mail slot clacked as it closed shut. I saw a figure rise up in the glass of the door. I was scared that whoever it was would simply break through the glass, so I froze, staring. Instead, I watched that person retreat from the porch. Although I was scared, I ran up to the door and looked out the window. I was able to see the guy running away from me. I guess calling for my dad really worked. After that, I really did go and call my dad. But gosh, this was just such a creepy and random strange thing to happen. Some weirdo just watching a kid through the mail slot. It was the nastiest thing. Ever since, whenever I was home alone, I would turn on all the lights to make it seem like the whole family was home instead. I never found out who it was that was watching me, but thankfully after that they never returned. When I was in high school, I was going through quite a lot. I guess everybody does at some point, but I really didn't know that at the time. I think it was particularly hard for me though because my family moved around often, so I didn't really have a chance to have any long-term friends. I did make some acquaintances and friends wherever I went, but it takes a while to really warm up to people. I spent quite a lot of time not sleeping at night, lost alone in my thoughts. When I couldn't go to sleep, I would instead go for a long walk. This was during the summertime. I don't really remember specifically why I was depressed, but I knew I was down in the dumps. Because of this, or maybe because we didn't have good AC in the house, I was always having a lot more trouble going to sleep. This night, after tossing and turning for quite a while, I decided it was time to get up and go for a walk. I'll never forget how hot it was that night, and how eerily quiet it was outside. The town we were living in was pretty small. It was one of those stoplight towns where nothing stayed open after 8 p.m. I didn't wear a watch, so I never really knew how long I would be out for on my walks. Most of the time, I would just look down and watch my feet, as I was so deep in thought. Often, quite a bit of time would pass before I even knew it. I walked all the way down to the train station and looked around there for a while. It was a stop that didn't have an agent or anything, just a standalone building. On the way there and the way back, I had to pass by this graveyard. It didn't really bother me at all, you know. I don't believe in ghosts or anything paranormal like that, so I didn't get scared walking by it or hold my breath or anything weird like that. On the way home, I was crossing by this graveyard. I wasn't paying much attention to it, but suddenly something caught the corner of my eye. Looking over to it, I noticed there was someone sitting in the cemetery on a gravestone, and he was waving at me. "Hey, psst, come over here," he invited me once he saw me looking. I couldn't make out much detail about him because there were, of course, no lights in the cemetery. I could clearly see, though, that he was waving at me. Once again, he invited me over, which was so weird. I probably just paused due to the strangeness of it all. I then decided to just walk on as if I had never noticed him, although it was clearly painfully obvious that I had. As I kept walking, though, he kept calling to me, trying to get my attention back. I did my best to ignore it as much as I could and keep going on. I jerked my head back a few times to look and see if he was following me, but he wasn't. He was just sitting on the gravestone trying to get my attention. I hurried the rest of my way home, constantly looking over my shoulder, hearing him call after me. I kept expecting to see him coming after me. I mean, who sits on a gravestone in the middle of the night, much less thinks they can get someone to come over to them? It was so weird and creepy as hell. I didn't see him again, though, and I made it home with no problem. But wow, did that spook me. And whenever I went for a walk for a while, I would take a route that did not pass through that graveyard. Okay, so there might be some people out there that don't think this is true, but I guarantee you that it is 100%. It seems outlandish, and perhaps even like a plot for a horror movie or a BDSM story or something. But it really happened to me, and it will really put a focus on how totally evil some people can be. Oh, first off, my name is Chip, and yeah, I'm not kidding, that is my actual name. I'm a bit older right now, hovering around 50 years old. Being born in the 70s, I think a lot of us got some pretty weird names. I guess I'm just lucky I didn't end up as a Corey or something. This story, though, actually takes place in the 80s. It happened when I was a teenager in high school. Now back then, I realized I was gay around the time I was 13 years old. It was a much harder realization back then than it is now. Not to offend younger people who may still have a difficult time with it, but in general, there was no acceptance or support system back then. Just watch some 80s movies and see how gays are portrayed. It was pretty damn bad. I had a very tough time due to the area that I lived in as well. It was a very rural area. I know that a lot of them have progressed nowadays, but it was very bad when I was in high school. I had a similar experience, I think, to someone I've heard before in a previous scary story. When I got to high school, I was absolutely terrified to take a shower with a bunch of the other guys. I mean, at 16 years old, a guy can get excited by watching the wind blow on a dandelion. Being in an open shower with 40 other naked guys, man, I didn't want to take that chance at all. Looking back on the subject now, I honestly don't think it would have been much of a problem. The absolute fear that I had that I would be found out probably would have killed any arousal problems I might have had. But I was a kid. I didn't know that back then. I was just scared. So I told the gym teacher that I was gay and that I didn't think the other guys wanted to shower with a gay guy. He was surprisingly nice about it, or at least it seemed that way. My opinion of him quickly changed when it became obvious that he'd told many other people. At first, it was just looks and laughing at me, but it was easy for me to know they were doing that because I was gay. There were guys shaking their dicks at me in the locker room and all sorts of things like that. The whole situation was just really uncomfortable. After a while of the minor harassments like that, it began actually getting worse. It didn't take long for me to be known as the school and honestly, I began regretting the whole thing. I mean, getting an erection in the shower would probably not have been half as bad as the torment I endured after. And the worst thing happened to me when I was 16 years old. That's the story I'm really telling. This was in the fall sometime. I remember vividly because there was a high school football game that night. And yes, I did attend it. A lot of the guys who tormented me were on the team. Really, most of the people in the school left me alone though. So I was able to sit in the back of the bleachers and watch the game without really being bugged too much about it. The bad thing was that my ride had to leave before the game was over. I didn't know this at the time, and it took me a while to realize that I would now have to walk home. It was going to be quite a bit of a walk actually. It was dark. I remember walking in town and getting teased by some of the people in the cars passing by. Guys yelling out stuff like, "I'll give you a ride for a blowjob." It was mostly fine until I got onto the country roads. It was much darker there, and there were less cars. That was something I had been looking forward to, but that all changed when two vehicles came driving down the road. One was a pickup truck and the other was a car. The vehicles were filled with the guys who played on the football team and tormented the hell out of me. I couldn't even run because I didn't know what was happening until the pickup truck stopped and blocked my way ahead, with the car blocking the way behind. The guys got out of the vehicles. I was scared to death. It was a dark country road and I had nowhere to run. I really thought they were just trying to scare me at first, you know. They got out of the truck and the car and surrounded me. I was terrified, but did my best not to show it. First, there were some verbal torments. A lot of them I just cannot repeat, but a lot of them were about making me take a shower with them. They decided that since Chip had never showered with them, they were going to take me and make me do so. The guys grabbed me. I struggled, although I knew there was no way it was going to help. Several of them pulled me over to the truck, and I kept struggling to get away. When they put me in the truck bed, I tried to get out of it, but they got sick of my attempts pretty quickly. "Strip him naked now," one of the guys suggested. "That'll keep him from trying to get away." And they did. Well, they stripped me down to my boxers at least. I mean, literally ripped my clothes apart. One of the guys took my wallet out of the pocket of my torn-up jeans and threw it into the truck cab. Then the guys took me into the bed of the truck. Their ploy worked. I mean, if I tried to get out of the truck now while it was moving, I would get really hurt without my clothes to protect me. Plus, it would take nearly no effort to rip my boxers off and leave me naked and cold outside. That was simply something I did not want. I was in the corner of the back of the bed. I was balled up and probably doing my best not to cry. There were 4 guys in the back watching me, mocking me and laughing. One of the guys didn't talk much, but he kept cleaning his fingernails with a pocket knife. That alone was pretty scary. He kept glaring at me while he was doing it too. When we got to the school, the guys grabbed me and pulled me out. They took me over to the locker room shower. Trust me, at that moment I was not scared of being aroused at all. This whole thing was so terrifying. The guys grabbed me and pulled me into the showers. A couple of them actually stripped their shirts and pants off as to not get them wet, I guess, which was odd. They held me down and forced me into the water. At first, it was very, very hot. I was scared they were going to scald me to death. They wanted to scrub me with a scrub brush, but they didn't have one, so they used a hard, bristled broom instead. A couple of guys pulled out bottles of liquid soap that they began squirting me with. It was a nightmare. After a while, either the water went cold or they turned it cold. I was so scared I didn't even care about being bare-assed at that moment. I was being scrubbed with a hard broom in a cold shower by 8 jocks, holding my head and crying. When they were done with me, they didn't even wash off all the soap or even dry me off. Instead, they took me naked, wet, soaked, and bleeding in places and took me back out to the pickup truck. They threw me into the back of the bed again. I cowered in the corner at that point. I was terrified, trying my best to not even look at the people who were tormenting me. But I did see the guy once again, looking at me and cleaning his fingernails with his pocket knife. For some reason, he scared me the most. He hadn't touched me or taunted me in the shower or anything. He just kept cleaning his nails with that knife. I was scared it was going to be used on me. Then they drove me way out into the hills. It was such an overwhelming experience that these 8 guys were doing this all because of me, and I had no idea what they were going to do next. They were driving me way out into the country, far away from anyone or anything I knew. After a long while, the truck pulled to the side of the road. "Get 'em out," one of the jocks ordered. I was pulled out of the truck and then pushed into a gross pile of dead leaves out the road. The guys were uttering all sorts of gay slurs. I got kicked a few times in the gut, the back, and even the balls. Every time I tried to protect myself, they would kick me harder. Finally, they left me naked and crying, dirty and beaten, in a pile of leaves way out in the country. I was hurting bad, humiliated, and shattered. I laid there for a long time. I think I had just given up. I didn't know what to do. How was I going to find my way home now, especially without any clothes on? I didn't even know where I was. At the time, none of it even mattered. I just laid there in that pile of dead leaves. I don't know how long after it happened, but I suddenly heard a car coming up the road. I wondered if I should ask for help or just lay there, but the car stopped where I was, and I heard someone get out. Someone came over and put their hand on me. When I looked up, I immediately recognized him as the guy who had been cleaning his nails with a knife. I screamed and tried my best to pull away from him. He was alarmed and tried to calm me down. He told me he wasn't going to hurt me. He wanted to take me home. I didn't want to believe him at first, and still tried to get away. He grabbed me though, and gave me a hug. He said very sternly, "I don't want to hurt you. Think back, I didn't call you any names and I didn't lay a hand on you. It's okay, don't be scared." I eventually gave him the benefit of the doubt. He brought me over to the car and had a towel that he helped to clean me off as much as possible. "I'm sorry, I don't have any clothes for you, but you can wear my jacket at least. It won't cover everything, but hopefully it'll keep you warm." He put me in the passenger seat and we began driving after a while. He talked to me again. "I'm sorry I couldn't do anything to help you, but 2 guys against 7, it's just not really gonna work. I kept my knife out though, the entire time, just in case anyone was going to try and kill you or something. I wasn't going to let them. But if I helped you, they would have beaten the shit out of me too, and we would have both been left there. I knew once this was over I could get my car and go help you. I'm sorry I didn't do more. I just thought this was the way I could help the most. I thought about how scared I was when he had that knife out. It changed my perspective a lot when I realized it was there to protect me." "Why are you helping me?" I asked him. "I just don't understand that shit, man. My dad is always talking about gays all the time, and I just don't understand why people have an issue with it. I don't. I mean, I think we should treat each other well. When the guys saw you at the game and wanted to come after you, I knew I couldn't stop them by myself, but I thought at least I could make sure you got home okay." He actually didn't drive me home. He drove me to his house, let me take a shower and get cleaned up. He even helped me clean up my wounds and gave me some new clothes. "I can't have you going home all naked and covered in dirt and leaves. Oh, and I grabbed this for you." He handed me my wallet. Someone left it in the cab of the truck. It was the weirdest night of my life. I experienced both the best of people and the worst of people in the same night. It was only because of this new guy Johnny that I even got the nerve to go back to school. I did end up missing a few days, telling my family that I was sick, but I knew eventually I had to go back. The tormenting continued for a while. Johnny hung out with me, however, after that, and really helped me to not get picked on as much as I may have been before. He was known as a kind of tough country boy and had a lot of respect. He always carried that pocket knife in his front pocket, too. Everyone could always see the bulge of that pocket knife.
A few nights ago, this happened to me, and I keep thinking about it. I work in the criminal justice field, where I see a lot of crime, and also I'm naturally a follower of this subreddit, scary movies and scary stories in general. I do have to disclaim that I do have a heightened sense of paranoia sometimes, but my girlfriend and her roommate both agreed that this was weird as well. I was out walking my girlfriend's roommate's dog, as she was working a night shift in their neighborhood. It's a very safe suburb in New York. I walked across the parking lot, and to this little field in the middle of a rotary, or a roundabout, whatever you call them. I lived in Boston for a while, and there they call them rotaries. I was screwing around a little in Reddit since it was near midnight, and in the middle of quarantine, so there were no cars out. The dog has a long leash, so she was sniffing around, when I kind of saw her stop and stare towards the road. I looked up, and in the distance I could see a black SUV stopped in the rotary. I pulled on my COVID mask that was on my chin. Since no one was around, I had it half off, as some people in New York are touchy about that, understandably. I did it just in case they stopped to lecture me, and I didn't care to engage in some dumb argument. I looked back at my phone, and then back up at the SUV that was still there. There was a family inside. Mother, father in the front, and a 12-year-old daughter in the back seat. I was a bit startled, though, because they were all just blankly staring directly at me. I waved a little to them and nodded, and started walking the dog a bit around the grass again. They started to slowly move. They came around the rotary, and I looked back. All of them were again staring directly at me. I figured that maybe they wanted to talk to me, so I stopped and waited for them to get around the circle, but when they approached, they kept driving very slowly, just staring at me directly the whole time. I gave another nervous half-wave as they drove past me, still extremely slowly, and just boring into me, back around the circle, then around once again. Literally all of them were just eyeing me down, even the little girl in the back seat. I put my arms up in a shrugging gesture as if to say, what the fuck? They did this a few more times, and I started to walk up to the edge of the circle to engage. Normally something I wouldn't do, but it was a family, so I sort of felt a bit more brave to do so. They sped up a little bit and went around the corner and turned off the rotary. I started to feel even weirder, so I decided I would walk back to her apartment building when they suddenly entered the rotary again. I was watching them out of the corner of my eye, and they were still just watching me. I started picking up the pace when they turned off the rotary towards me. I kept walking faster as they continued to follow me. Once I got to the sidewalk, I turned around because I didn't want them to know which door I was walking to. It's on a strip mall with a few other apartment buildings and stores. They stopped around 30 feet behind me, and they looked out, staring from the front window. The little girl was now in the center seat, staring at me too. I once again raised my arms. "Can I help you?" There was no response at all from them. I stood there, no movement from either of us. I took my phone back out and typed their license plate into a note app. Again, a weird thing I do, probably from my work in criminal defense and general paranoia. They slowly turned to the other side of the parking lot, never taking their eyes off me, until they got to the end of the lot. I rushed into the apartment building, which luckily needed a code to enter. I got up and told my girlfriend, and then a roomie in the AM. They were both kind of freaked out. I watched them out of her window, and they pulled back up to where I was standing on the sidewalk. They just sat there in the car, staring at where I had been. I couldn't see them at this point, but the roof of their car. It felt like 10 minutes before they finally slowly drove away. I can't stop thinking about their creepy-ass blank stare at me. Somehow it made it even creepier that it seemed to be a normal-looking family with a young daughter. If it was two younger guys, I could have marked it off as they were bored or screwing with me. But this was just blank, unmoving expressions that made it so eerie. Back in 2015, I was working as a live-in home health aide for a wealthy family. It was just me and my patient living in a very nice condo, in a quiet neighborhood on a golf course. We were also the youngest people who lived there. I was 27 at the time. My patient was a 21-year-old male with Asperger's, SPD, and BPD, some substance abuse problems as well. He had recently gotten into some trouble and been legally declared incompetent. We'll call him Jake. Jake was a nice kid, but he had severe emotional issues and almost no social awareness, compounded by the refusal to take prescribed medication, which worked incredibly well when he did take it. His drug abuse didn't help either. He was taken advantage of a lot because of the crowd that he hung around with. Right before I moved in, 6 friends came out to hang with Jake one day and ended up staying for 2 weeks and draining his bank account on various drugs, absolutely trashing the place. Jake was a very lonely kid, and he never said no to people. He wanted everybody to like him. Honestly, I think Jake was about 14 to 15 years old mentally. I think he turned to drugs to deal with depression and anxiety, and also to fit in with the people around him. He's much better now, though. It was a very sweet gig. I was paid very well, lived in a nice condo rent-free, and basically I just had to keep our house clean, keep some food in the fridge, and make sure he always took his medication. When I first moved in, my boss, Jake's mother, warned me about a girl who occasionally stayed with her father, who was our downstairs neighbor. She told me that the girl was named Amber. She looked younger, but she was about 37 years old, tall, blonde, and very thin. She was right. She looked a lot younger, like she was only about 25 or so. She said that Amber didn't have a car or a job, and that she was an addict who liked to use Jake. Amber's father had custody of her 2 children, and she would come visit the kids and stay for a few days a week. She said one day Amber asked to borrow Jake's car for an hour, and ended up running off with it for about 2 weeks. She was also the one who introduced Jake to the 6 friends who trashed the condo. She was bad news, and she was never to be allowed in again. She wanted me to call her immediately if Amber ever stopped by, or if Jake went anywhere with her. After the theft, she put a GPS on Jake's car, and allegedly she could stop the engine as well. My boss made it clear that she didn't expect me to be a security guard, just to notify her if things were going on. Leading up to this event, I had a few run-ins with this Amber. I had to politely tell her that things like she was not allowed to come into the apartment, Jake couldn't take her to the store, Jake couldn't go to a party at her boyfriend's house. She was always spaced out. She talked very slow and seemed wide-eyed and just off. She explained to me that she had been hit by a car while riding a bike recently, and complained that she was the one who ended up going to jail. I was very doubtful. Apparently she takes a lot of Xanax and was under the influence. I think that explains the spaced out part. Anyway, she was never aggressive, but it was clear that she didn't like me at all. She would often say things like, "Jake is his own person. He's a 21-year-old man. He doesn't need your permission." Whenever she spoke to Jake, when we saw her at the gym or in the parking lot, she would always whisper in his ear, no doubt trying to manipulate him into giving her money or something. On to the incident. Jake was out of state with his father, giving me a bit of a mini vacation. My best friend was staying over to spend a few nights with me, and we were drinking PBR and watching RuPaul's Drag Race. It was about 11 p.m., and we hear a light knock at the door. I go to investigate through the peephole, and I see right away that it's Amber. I ignored her. She knocks louder about 30 seconds later. I watched her leave through the peephole and sat back down, telling my friend about the situation. 5 minutes go by, and she's back. This time she's pounding on the door like a cop. I'm getting pissed because I'm off work, and I didn't want to deal with her crazy, especially when my friend was over. I say nothing and go back to the couch. She keeps knocking. She starts yelling through the door, "Hello? Jake? I need help. Hello?" I still don't answer. Then I hear her try to force it open. It's locked. Always. I'm a habitual door locker. This enrages her or something, and she starts screaming and pounding non-stop. I got up and looked through the peephole again. She looked like a demon. Her pupils were huge, so I know she was on something. She looked absolutely crazed. Her hair was tangled and wild. She was sweaty and angry. Looking back, I'll never forget those wide pupils looking at me through an evil glare. I asked her through the door what she wanted. She said she needed to speak to Jake right now. He owed her some money, and she needs a ride to her boyfriend's house right now. I tell her Jake isn't home. She then asks me if I'll take her. I tell her no, that I've been drinking a lot, and that I'm going to bed. She let out a frustrated scream, punched the door a few times, and finally left. My friend and I went to bed shortly thereafter. I didn't hear from her again after that. The next morning, we were getting ready to leave to go to breakfast. I hear a knock like a policeman's knock at the door. You know the sound. I look through the peephole expecting to see Amber, but this time it was an actual cop. I opened my door and I could see the parking lot was crawling with police. There was a van marked crime scene unit and an ambulance. I honestly assumed Amber had overdosed or something. The cop wanted to ask me if I'd heard anything strange last night. I told him about my encounter with Amber, and I asked if she was okay. He told me she was in custody for the murder of her father. He asked me if Jake owned a crossbow and if it was missing. Yes, and yes. It had been missing for a few weeks. He said I needed to speak to some detectives at the station. I don't know if she came to my door before or after she murdered her father with a crossbow, like she was Tyrion Lannister or something. but the detective told me that his theory was that she was a heroin addict, and she was withdrawing and needed to get her boyfriends for more dope. She tried to get Jake to drive her, and when that didn't work, she asked her father, who refused. This is what went down. They argued. Other neighbors heard that part. She killed him with a stolen crossbow and stole his truck. She only got about a mile away before she was signaled to pull over. She led the cops in a high-speed chase over the span of 2 counties before she finally lost control and crashed. The cops were only pulling her over on suspicion of drunk driving, but when they went to speak with her, she told them she was speeding because she needed to check on her dad. She thought someone had stabbed him. They asked her why she thought that, and she refused to answer any more. Finally, they sent police for a welfare check, and they found him before her sons did. So that was the time my crazy drug addict neighbor murdered her father with my patient's crossbow. Further below, there's a link. Just look at those eyes. This is a story I've wanted to tell for a long time. Yes, it is very long. It's as long as it needs to be to say what I need to say. This took place between 1995 and 2002. Everyone in their life has had a bad friend or two, and I had an epically bad friend. If it hadn't happened to me, I would have never even known this strange mental disorder was real, or that people could behave this way outside of Lifetime Channel movies. I grew up in northern Indiana. I went to a large high school in the mid-90s, and my senior year I met another student named Hannah. She had recently transferred from the main local Catholic high school in the area. It was unusual for someone to transition so late from private to public school. Hannah said she had been expelled because of a fight with another student over some drama about a boy. She said the other girl had made allegations against her and accused her of attacking her. Whatever had happened, the police had been contacted, and she'd had a restraining order placed on her by the other girl. It had forced her expulsion, and that was how I came to meet her. Hannah said none of it was true, of course. She said she never tried to hurt her at all. Later I went to college in Indiana. She went to college in Florida. One day, a friend of mine from the dorms ran into a guy she had known from Catholic school, back in my hometown. Once he left, she told me about this incident that had happened to him where these 2 girls were fighting over him about which one was his girlfriend. Neither one of them was dating him, and yet both of these girls thought that they were in a secret relationship with him. The whole thing had been very strange. Then she said that one of them was a girl named Hannah. The next summer I was back in my hometown, and Hannah was as well. I hung out with her casually. I told her what I had heard about her. She said she would tell me sometime what really happened. She had a crush on this boy, but she had seen him talk to another student named Julie, and she became very jealous. She said she was convinced that this boy Mike wanted to be her boyfriend. She was sure Julie must have said something bad about her. Hannah said Julie was popular and pretty, a cheerleader. She hated everything about her, so she decided she would try to see if she could push her to commit suicide. Hannah said that it hadn't worked, but that she had a nervous breakdown. I asked her what she had done. We went back to Hannah's house. Up in her bedroom, she pulled something out from the back of her closet. It was a set of books. One was a book on how to use dirty tricks to get revenge on people, and one was a book with a cartoon character on the front pulling their hair out, and it said in big letters, gaslighting. I know it's a common phrase now, but back in 1995 I had never heard of it. I asked Hannah what the book was about, and she said it was about how to drive someone crazy. She said it was simple. You just make them believe things aren't really true, or that things they think are real never happened. She told me what she had really done to Julie a couple of years back in high school. She had pretended to be friends with her. She got her phone number, and then she had started making these anonymous phone calls to her. This would have been way before cell phones were common. She had a friend from her church who had a crush on her, and she would trade sexual favors with him in exchange for him pretending to be Mike on the phone. He would get a blowjob for every time he did this for Hannah. Fake Mike would tell Julie not to talk in school so they could keep things private. Hannah would put notes on her locker and sign Mike's name to them. Fake Mike would make plans to meet Julie at the mall or the movies and then never show up. It all sounds very stupid, but they would have been about 14 or 15-year-old girls when this happened. Hannah said she had done something really embarrassing, but that it had worked. She had a mixtape, and she would whisper nasty little phrases like, "You want to die," or "You should kill yourself," between songs, and had it played in her bedroom when Julie was over. Obviously, she commented on it, and Hannah sat there with a straight face and said she hadn't heard anything, or had no idea what she was talking about. She had set it up with her brother earlier, and had asked him to help her play a prank on her friend. He came into her bedroom and said he couldn't hear anything and turned around and told Julie she must be crazy. Julie's parents decided to confront this boy and his family about his behavior towards their daughter. He had no idea what was going on, of course, and because her parents had confronted this boy about something he was never doing in the first place, Julie had been publicly humiliated at her high school, and everyone was talking about how crazy she was. Hannah loved every bit of it, until Julie's parents got their phone bill and decided to give it a look. Mike might not have been calling their house, but somebody had been, and they had numerous anonymous phone calls. They checked it out and found they were all coming from Hannah's phone number. Julie confronted Hannah about it at school, and that was when something violent happened between the two of them in the stairwell. Julie said Hannah had started screaming at her that Mike was her secret boyfriend. Hannah was very angry about that. She said Julie made that part up to try and get back at her and embarrass her for what she had done. She said Julie was exaggerating about what had happened in the stairwell, and it had been an accident. She had never tried to push her over the railing. She'd merely bumped into her. Hannah wasn't embarrassed about it at all. She was so proud of it. The only thing that upset her was that she had been caught, but she said that most people at her Catholic school still thought Julie was crazy. She considered it something of a victory. Hannah didn't have anything to say in her defense, just that when she liked a boy, she would do anything to be with them. That summer, Hannah started dating a guy named Derek. Every time I saw her, she told me tales about their wild and crazy sex life, how much he was in love with her. Hannah said it was a secret affair and they were sneaking around behind his girl's back. We saw him once at a party. He screamed at Hannah to stay away from him and leave him and his girl alone. Someone had been making strange anonymous phone calls to him and his girlfriend. He paid to have the number traced back, and found it was Hannah. Hannah admitted that she had been trying to break them up because he was taking too long to do it himself. She had overplayed it, and now he was angry and had broken things off with her. She was depressed after Derek, so I took her out to a bar. Hannah started flirting with this much older guy in his 40s who was sitting alone by himself. She had recently purchased a cell phone. This would have been about 96 or 97, when they were still kind of new and novel. The next thing I knew, she had this phone out, and I thought she was giving this old guy her phone number. Instead, he asked her what she wanted him to say. She typed a phone number in, and handed the guy her phone. He made disgusting comments to whoever answered about how he was having sex with this guy's girlfriend, and commenting on what a whore she was. He hung up and started laughing, and handed the phone back to Hannah. She gave him a $20 bill, and said the girl was a bitch and deserved it for stealing her boyfriend. She was paying complete strangers to anonymously call people she hated on her cell phone, and recite some prearranged script to spread rumors about them. I ran into a mutual friend later in the summer and had mentioned that Derek had broken things off with Hannah. She gave me a very funny look and said there had never been any relationship to break off in the first place. A year later, we were both temporarily living back with our parents, and sort of adrift. Hannah had been kicked out of her dorm over an accusation made by another student, and never completed her degree. She had started hanging out with some old friends from high school. One of those former high school friends was a young woman named Kelly, who Hannah had been very good friends with. Something had happened between the two of them, because Hannah went on and on about how much she hated her. It had something to do with Kelly's new boyfriend, Dan. Hannah insisted she was using him in some bizarre plot to make another man jealous, and was worried that she would hurt him because she had found out about an STD that she had. I drove by her house one night and there were 2 police cars out front. I went home and called her, and she said she couldn't talk. I went over and saw her the next day. I thought that their house had been robbed or something. No, the police had been there to talk to her about an incident that had been reported. Hannah was upset. She said that she had to tell the police that she had smoked weed and gotten high because Kelly made an accusation against her. Hannah said it was an accident, a misunderstanding. She swore she hadn't been trying to hurt her. The day after Hannah told me about how much she hated Kelly, apparently she had called her up and said she wanted to talk to her about something. She and another friend had shown up, and the three of them had gone out to some local overlook to smoke a joint. The other girl waited down below for the two of them to talk privately. Hannah had asked Kelly to look at something, and when she turned her back, Kelly said that Hannah grabbed her and tried to push her off the ledge. They were about 100 feet up in the air, and she would have most likely been killed by the fall. Kelly said they fought back and forth. She regained her balance and took off screaming about what Hannah had tried to do. Hannah said it was all a misunderstanding, an accident. She had been trying to show her something but lost her balance because she was high from the marijuana. She said Kelly had almost fallen off because she had hysterically overreacted. Kelly had been very upset and insisted that Hannah had done it on purpose. She was jealous over her relationship with Dan. It was obvious to everyone that Hannah was completely obsessed. What Kelly had not done, however, was tell the police that they had smoked a joint right before this happened. When Hannah did, the police said that they didn't have enough evidence for any kind of case. They weren't happy with Kelly for omitting that part of the account. That was it for Hannah and most of her high school friends. Kelly stuck to her version of what happened, and all of her friends sided with her. People began talking about the strange rumors that had followed Hannah around since high school. I thought it was suspicious, of course, but I couldn't bring myself to believe that she tried to kill another woman. I thought that sort of thing only happened in the movies, not small towns in Indiana. I did not, however, want to be friends with her. She was a complete embarrassment to be around. She had almost no friends left in town at that point. She called me up to tell me she had decided she needed a change. She was going to pursue a different career and move to Minneapolis to make that happen. She moved in 1998, and I honestly thought that I would never see her again. To be honest, I wish I hadn't. She called me up about a year and a half later. She said she was doing really well, and that the move had been really good for her. She said she'd made some friends, met a boy, and was completely in love. She said this was the guy she was going to marry. His name was Dan, and she told me that he was the guy that had gotten her interested in punk rock and heroin. I kind of paused when she said that. I wasn't any kind of angel in my 20s, but I never even dabbled in hard stuff like that, and it didn't sound very good at all. Hannah insisted it wasn't a habit. She said it was amazing and easy to control as long as you were careful. This was a complete change in lifestyle and scene. Before this, she had been something of a hippie chick, but that was all gone now. At this point, her life revolved around hair, punk rock, heroin, and Dan, and she wanted to come back for a visit. We went to the mall, and she stopped at a kiosk and said she wanted to buy a cell phone. She lived 8 hours away in a completely different state, with a completely different area code. We actually got into a small argument about it. Back in 2000, cell phones were purchased and billed from your local area code, and you paid through the nose if you were roaming. Hannah just kept telling me to drop it because she had done her research and it would be fine. She bought the phone and listed her boyfriend Dan as the main user on the registration. She left, and I noticed she had left her curling iron behind. I thought I would surprise her by calling her new cell phone. She had set it up at my house, and I got the number from the caller ID. No one picked up. Instead, it went to an answering machine for Dan. The same Dan that had been dating Kelly years earlier, and the same Dan that Hannah had been accused of being obsessed with. There was no doubt about who it was. I hung up and wondered why she had lied to me about who her boyfriend was. A couple of minutes directly after that, she called me back from her original cell phone. She played it off as some kind of coincidence that I had just called that other number. She said she had run into hometown Dan and his friends and he had lost his phone, so Hannah had done him a favor and given him the one she had just purchased. I said how strange it was that she would buy a phone for her boyfriend Dan, only to run into someone else with the same name and give it away instead. Dan's real name is very common, probably one of the most common names for men of my generation. Hannah joked about how many different people she knew with that exact same name. A couple of months later she called. She wanted to come visit again in the summer. No matter what she said about being in control of the heroin use, it was very obvious that it had become a full-fledged habit. Things had taken a turn in her life. Her boyfriend Dan had moved to Chicago. Hannah said that he was still in love with her, and they were still together, but something had happened with his ex-girlfriend. They were taking a break and only seeing one another privately. Hannah said he was trying to protect her. According to her, his ex-girlfriend had refused to accept their breakup and had been stalking Dan for months, one of the reasons he had moved. She had taken an overdose of heroin and tried to commit suicide when she found out that Hannah and Dan were together. That was the reason they had decided to keep their relationship secret. That was why Hannah was really in town. He was going to be coming later to join her, and they had set up a get-together. I wanted to meet him, but Hannah said he wouldn't act like her boyfriend when other people were around. I started to question her. She got angry, said she wouldn't let me meet him because I wouldn't understand the relationship. We got into a very fierce fight. I ordered her out of my house and made it clear that I wanted nothing to do with her from then on. Her mother called me about a year later. She said Hannah was living with them in Atlanta because something very bad had happened in Minneapolis. Hannah didn't have any friends left at all. Her mother straight up begged me to please forgive her so she could at least have someone to talk to. Hannah had spent 3 months in rehab and was off the heroin but emotionally not doing well. She said she had to make a trip back to Minneapolis to take care of some things and pick up some of her stuff. Her mother was worried that being back there and around her old friends would trigger her wanting to use again. It was very important that Hannah not relapse. If she did, the consequences would be severe. She said she wanted me to go with her, so I said I would. Hannah would never tell me what had happened. She would just say that someone had almost died. It had been an accident, but it had still been her fault. She drove into town to pick me up for our trip to Minneapolis, but said we had to stop somewhere first. We went to the old bar downtown that we used to hang out in when she lived in town. She had wanted to meet someone. Some young woman walked in. Hannah walked over to her and hugged her and started crying. She was apologizing all over the place and kept telling her that she needed her to realize that it had been an accident. She said she forgave her, but that her life had been difficult since what had happened, and she could not have anything to do with Hannah anymore, could no longer be friends with her. Hannah asked if she had ever spoken to her ex-boyfriend and had a chance to work things out with him. She said no. He was mad at her and refused to talk to her. Hannah said he had a new cell phone and gave her the number just in case she changed her mind and wanted to get a hold of him. She left. I was sitting there totally confused by what I had just witnessed. I was really uncomfortable with what I had heard. I asked Hannah if the ex-boyfriend she was talking about was hometown Dan. She said no, it was someone else that I had never met. Hannah said she and her Dan had broken up because he was still using heroin, and it was too painful to talk about him. It was so painful that when we got to Minneapolis, to please never bring him up. She said her friends knew not to mention him around her, and asked me not to as well. We got to Minneapolis, and the young woman we were staying with turned out to be one of Hannah's former roommates. That's when I found out what had really happened, and what Hannah had been refusing to talk about. It turned out that girl from the bar had been the other roommate, the one that almost died because of something Hannah did. We settled in, and Hannah said that she could explain what happened a year ago. A year ago? That was the first time that I realized that this had happened much longer in the past than I thought. The former roommate said that she was happy that Hannah was clean, but she needed her to explain why she had tried to kill the other girl. Those were her words. She wasn't calling it an accident. She said she was there. She saw it, and Hannah had done that to her on purpose. She wanted to know why. This is what she described. Hannah had a friend from Indiana that had broken up with her boyfriend Dan, after Hannah had told her that she found out he was cheating on her and gotten another woman pregnant. Hannah invited her to live with her up in Minneapolis to get away from him and start over. She had no idea that Hannah was a heroin user. She did not like Minneapolis at all. She had experienced a run of bad luck in the couple of weeks she had been there, and even though Hannah kept trying to convince her to stick it out to see if she would like it, she had decided she was going to leave and go back home. She had regretted her breakup with Dan. She wanted to call him and see if they could work through it. They had been together for almost 2 years after all. She was worried because she had lost touch with him. Hannah had been able to track down his phone number for her through some mutual friends, but no matter how many times she called or how much she begged, he refused to answer her calls or call her back when she left messages. She was upset and told Hannah she was going to stop by his apartment to see him on her way back to Indiana. She was supposed to be leaving within a day. Hannah kept insisting that she would love heroin if she would just try a bit, and had been pressuring her very hard to join in with everyone else. The roommate was angry about that. She said Hannah knew she was scared and didn't even want to try it. Hannah had promised her that she would be safe, and promised her that it would be a small dose. She said she knew what she was doing, and she gave in. Hannah bought the heroin and bought a lot more than normal, which she said was for a party later. She prepared the needles and said she had just used a small amount. Instead, she used all that she had bought, which turned out to be way more than necessary to kill all of them. Hannah had given the girl the injection, and she slumped over immediately and stopped breathing. Hannah then moved to the other roommate and told her everything was fine in the other room and that she was enjoying herself. She tried to convince her to take her dose, but she wanted to check on the other girl first. Hannah walked over and had an imaginary conversation with the young woman, who was completely unconscious, trying to convince the other roommate that she was fine. She went in to check on her herself, and immediately saw she wasn't even breathing. She panicked and started screaming about why she was lying. She ran for the phone. Hannah ran after her. She dialed 911. Hannah grabbed the phone and hung it up. They called back and she said it had been a mistake and they were fine. Hannah wouldn't let her near the phone and kept trying to tell her that she was being hysterical and that everything was okay. She tried to pin her down and force the needle on her. She fought back and ran out of the apartment and down the hall to a neighbor's, where they called 911. When the paramedics got there, the girl was clinically dead. They worked on her and got a heartbeat, and transferred her to a local hospital in a comatose state. She lived, thankfully, but for a while it wasn't clear if she would pull through. Hannah told the police she didn't know why she had done it. After talking with a lawyer, she said it was because of heroin psychosis, and that she had been temporarily insane at the time. She agreed to a long-term rehab stay, and a year of drug testing and probation. After that, the charges against her were dropped. That had been the reason that it was so important Hannah did not relapse. She would have been looking at some serious prison time. Hannah said it had been a strange temporary hallucination that had caused her behavior, and that she had never meant to hurt her. The whole thing was an accident and a misunderstanding. The same excuse she always used. I'm going to spell this out, since the morons who work for the Minneapolis Police Department was too stupid to realize this 20 years ago. Hannah was obsessed with this girl's boyfriend, Dan. She had been obsessed with him for years. She had developed a detailed and deranged fantasy that the two of them were in a secret relationship together, because she had a peculiar and somewhat rare psychiatric condition called erotomania, or Declermabalt syndrome. She believed that this woman was standing in the way of their romance, so she instigated herself to her and pretended to be her friend. She wanted to find a way to get close enough to her to get her out of the way. She successfully managed to spread rumors and interfere in their relationship enough that the two of them broke up, and then Hannah invited this young woman to Minneapolis to isolate her from her other friends. This was the year 2000. We didn't have text message or Facebook back then for keeping in touch with people. She lulled her into a false sense of friendship and security, so she could manipulate her to get her close enough to her to hurt her. When she realized she was still in love with Dan and wanted to talk to him, Hannah realized she would eventually find out that the rumors she had been told were not true, and that Hannah was the source. She purchased a cell phone in Indiana and made a recording of Dan's answering machine message so that she could impersonate him on the phone. The young woman would believe she was in contact with him. She never even knew that Dan never received any of the messages. Hannah was using that to spy on her. When she said she was going to go back home and show up and see if Dan would talk to her in person, Hannah knew that meant she would find out she had given her a fake phone number. That she had gone to extreme lengths to prevent her from speaking to him, and it would have been obvious as to why. She tried to talk her into trying heroin because she planned on killing her and her other roommate. That would be a good way to make it appear to be an accident. Hannah was about to have her obsessions with Dan, her delusional beliefs about him, and her bizarre mental disorder exposed, and she knew that. She knew for at least a day or more before the accident, which is why it was clear that her actions were premeditated, because her motive was. All this would have been remarkably easy to figure out if the police had contacted Dan, if they had just taken a look at her phone records. Phone harassment has always been her favorite hobby. Instead, they treated it just like the other 99 overdoses they have to respond to every month, and gave Hannah the old rehab or prison option. Since her family could afford a lawyer and a 3-month rehab stay, that was the option she took. The police never investigated her for anything, never contacted the man Dan at the center of this, never took any serious look into her background. It wasn't an accident. It was an attempted murder, and a pretty easy one to prove at that. Instead, the police totally dropped the ball, and because of their incompetence, she was allowed to completely get away with it. By the way, just in case any idiots who work for the Minneapolis Police Department ever read this, there's no statute of limitations on first-degree attempted murder. At the time, I didn't know any of this. I was trying to act as a support system for a former friend, who was suicidal on the cusp of a heroin overdose. I was suspicious, of course, but anytime I asked Hannah questions, she just said it was too painful to talk about, or guilt-trip me into not respecting her boundaries. She had sworn to me that this young woman had never been in any relationship with the Dan from our hometown that she had known years earlier. I returned to Indiana, and Hannah returned to her parents in Atlanta. I didn't talk to her for a while after that. She called later and wanted to visit her own hometown again. Once again, I let her stay with me. This time, though, we ran into Dan. He had moved to Chicago, but just happened to be back in town that weekend. I hadn't seen the man in years. Hannah had contacted him to get together. She spent the whole afternoon trying to pull him aside to talk to him, but he made it clear he had only wanted to show up because he wanted to see me. He had broken up with Kelly years earlier, but I thought he had a long-term girlfriend since then. Dan said she had left him a year ago and just disappeared. He had called her repeatedly, but she had completely cut him off. He was nice to me. He was handsome. He was a lot of fun to be around, and he asked me out. We made plans to meet up the next day. I saw him at a bar and he turned around and walked out the door. He wouldn't even look at me. I was upset and confused. Hannah was super sympathetic. She apologized for not telling me what he was like, and said he had this weird thing about lying to girls and playing with their emotions by pretending to like them. It wasn't like I had never been lied to by a boy before, but this situation felt strange. A week later, my student loan came through, and I decided to go back to college and finish my degree. I moved a couple of hours away. The first person that called me was Hannah. Once again, she wanted to come visit me. She insisted she had gone out and got me a surprise, and needed to give it to me in person. She said she had something really important to talk to me about, and that it would sound weird, but she asked me to promise her that I wouldn't tell anyone she was coming to see me. I humored her. She showed up at my apartment, and when she walked in, the first thing she asked me was if I had told anyone she would be there. At first, I said no. She said she had something for me, and reached into her purse. She paused and said she just wanted to make sure that no one knew she was there. I was frustrated. I kind of offhand said that no one besides my mom and my best friend. Hannah got furious. She was angry I had told anyone else she would be there, and refused to show me what she had brought as a surprise for me. She went and locked it in her glove compartment, because she said she didn't want me to snoop in her stuff and find it. She kept saying she wanted to talk about something, but the time wasn't right. She decided to go home a day early. Then one day, a couple of weeks later, out of the blue, she just showed up on my doorstep one evening. I was on the phone with my best friend, who, by the way, went to the same Catholic high school as Hannah, and while not close friends with her, knew who she was. I was talking to her when I saw Hannah walk up to my front door. It was an 8-hour drive from Atlanta to Indiana. I got up and opened the door. I still had the phone up to my ear. When I opened it, she had her head down and she had one hand inside her purse. I said her name. She looked up at me and pulled something purple from her purse. She saw I was on the phone and swiveled around, put whatever she had been holding in her bag back inside. She was acting very strange. She was shaking and I was worried. I asked her to come inside. At that point, I was convinced she was back on heroin, and that had been the secret she had been trying to talk to me about for months. She said she was upset about a boy and needed to talk to me. She had something that she wanted to show me. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a handgun. It was a purple and black revolver, and I realized from the color that it was what she had pulled from her purse when I had first answered the door. She had been checking to make sure the safety was on, and I was lucky she hadn't accidentally shot me because I had startled her. She said the gun was because she was back on heroin and scared of the part of town she had to go in order to buy it. I didn't know back then, but revolvers don't have safeties. She told me about a musician in Atlanta that she had met. She was frustrated because he had a girlfriend, and she hadn't been able to find a way to get him to pay attention to her. She wanted me to tell her what I had done to Dan so she could use it on this guy. She told me he was still talking about me months later, and she wanted to know why he was still interested even though we hadn't talked since the previous summer. From my point of view, he wasn't. He had ghosted me months earlier. Hannah kept insisting that I must have done something to him. It was like she was implying I had hypnotized him or something ludicrous, and she wanted me to tell her. I clearly explained that I hadn't done anything. He had ignored me and then never returned my phone calls after I tried calling him. She cried and drank for a couple of hours, and then turned around and drove the 8 hours back to Atlanta in the middle of the night. For the record, Hannah was the one who gave me Dan's phone number. After this, something very strange seemed to set in motion. I got a call from an anonymous number, and when I answered it, it was Hannah, who said someone wanted to talk to me. She flipped me over to a three-way call with someone else. It was Dan's roommate and best friend in Chicago. He started screaming at me, asking why I was playing games with Dan and messing with him. He said he was going out of his mind, and I needed to call him back and stop whatever it was I had been doing to him. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about. Dan had never called me, and I had tried to call him, and then we were disconnected. Another anonymous call that was really Hannah with another three-way call, and a group of boys who started yelling at me, telling me they would kill me for what I had done to Dan. Then another disconnected line before I could ask them what they were even talking about. I called Hannah to find out what was going on. It was the craziest and most disturbing conversation I've ever had with another person. At first, she just kept saying that I had hurt Dan. I couldn't ever talk to him again or have any contact with him. None of it made any sense, since this was about a guy that had refused to even return my phone calls and had ignored me for months. Hannah started getting very upset, kept saying that I knew what I had done. I just wouldn't admit it. She said that Dan hated me and had never wanted anything to do with me, but that I was doing things to make him say that and pretend that he liked me instead of her. I had no idea what the hell was going on. Dan was her secret boyfriend. He was in love with her and had been so for years. She said the two of them had been together since they were teenagers, and that I knew it but was pretending not to. I asked her how she could have been his girlfriend, when I knew of all the other girls he had dated. She started screeching about how those weren't real relationships. He was only pretending to like them. When he talked about them, he was really talking about her, but other people kept doing things to him so that he couldn't tell her directly how he felt. But she just knew. She insisted that he found out ways to let her know, that he was always thinking about her. She said that all of his friends respected their privacy, which is why they would play along when he pretended he was dating some other people. She kept insisting he was in love with her, and no one else. She was sick of people pretending to be her friend and then stabbing her in the back by going after her boyfriend. She said she would not put up with anyone coming between them, and not let anyone hurt him. I was forcing him to forget how he really felt, and that it had hurt him to not be with her. She wouldn't let me hurt him. I realized that she wasn't making any sense, and that she was totally psychotic. I told her never to contact me again, and I hung up. All I could think about was how she had pulled a gun out of her purse the last time she had shown up at my apartment. She had given a fatal overdose of heroin to another woman, and had been accused of another for luring them to an edge and trying to push her off. The one thing we all had in common was Dan. I called the number I had for him. It was disconnected. I thought about that weird situation with the cell phone she had purchased a couple of years earlier. I found that old number in my address book and called it, except this time it wasn't Dan's voice on the answering machine. It was mine. The psycho bitch had made a recording of my voicemail and had put it on a cell phone that she owned. Once I discovered that, everything fell clearly into place. That was what had happened to that girl in Minneapolis. That was why Dan had spent the last several months thinking he was contacting me. There was no relationship with Dan. It was all in Hannah's head, and she was frantically trying to keep other women away from him to protect her fantasy from imploding. She is psychotic. It's a real mental disorder, and it's a fixed delusional belief that another person is secretly in love with you. Not everyone who has it will be violent, but some people unfortunately are. In some cases, other people are used in strange psychotic dramas and vicious smear campaigns that are aimed at trying to rearrange reality so that it conforms with the delusions inside their head. The people that are perceived as standing in their way can be victims of extreme violence. Hannah showed up the next day at my apartment, screaming at me to let her in. I would not, of course, and I was getting ready to call the police. She started crying and saying that Dan had killed himself, and then she walked away, and that was the last time I ever saw her. I spoke to my parents, who told me I had received several phone calls to their house from people letting me know the same thing. I changed my phone number to keep her from contacting me. I contacted the police in Indiana, who said if she showed up again that they could arrest her for felony intimidation, but not for anything she had done months earlier. I contacted the police in Minneapolis, but I knew very little information, only Hannah's name, not when or where it had happened. I asked repeatedly to please be allowed to speak to someone, but the woman on the phone said they weren't interested in talking to me. I moved so she wouldn't know where I lived. I cut myself off from anyone from my hometown who I thought might know her, so nothing could ever get back to her about where I lived. The last I heard from her, she was stalking some new guy down in Atlanta. I would have been more than happy to meet the bitch in a courtroom, but unfortunately the law is nothing like you see on TV. So unless I ever had the privilege of sitting in on her sentencing hearing, Hannah from Indiana, let's not meet. It was a few years back. I was home alone with my daughter, who was basically a newborn. She was asleep in her bassinet beside my bed. I was in my old house, alone as my ex-husband was working nights. My bedroom was on the second floor. It was around midnight when I woke up to give my daughter a bottle. As she settled back to sleep, I laid in bed scrolling on my phone, trying to get tired again. I'm cautious about believing things people post to Facebook without sources, but a few people had made the same post. I stumbled across an article stating that there was a murderer on the run. He had killed a man in the next town over from me and was now running from the police. It said they were advising people to stay inside, lock their doors, and some even received phone calls. Stuff like this was a very rare happening where I lived, so of course I freaked out. I texted my ex-husband at work, who had a hard time believing this, but told me to keep my police scanner on. I fell asleep. I'm not sure how long I was asleep for, but I suddenly woke up because the officers on the scanner were screaming, "Shots fired!" I had a hard time distinguishing what I was hearing on my phone and what was going on outside. Rapid gunfire started, and it sounded like it was right on the street outside my window. It took me a moment to register the noise as shots to my virgin ears, and then it was like time suddenly slowed down. I rolled off my bed and grabbed my daughter. I remember running into the hallway in what seemed like slow motion, blurry tunnel vision with her, away from all the windows and screaming, "What the fuck is happening?" inside my head. I shakily dialed my ex-husband at work. He still wasn't really believing what was going on, so I yelled and called my mom. I just wanted someone to talk to, so I didn't feel so alone and scared. I kept telling her there was a shooting, and I was crying. Maybe she didn't understand me in her half-woke state of mind. I don't even remember what happened after she realized what I was saying, because I was suddenly hanging up and putting the phone on the floor. I stayed in the hallway for I don't know how long, clutching my sleeping baby who somehow slept through all of this chaos. My body was on vibrate. Sometime later, my phone was ringing, and it was my mom. I could barely focus enough to listen, but I thought she told me she was coming over. I told her to stay at home where she was safe. She was yelling at me that she was already on the road, but the police had blocked it off. She told them she was my daughter. I lived on the road, and they let her come. They had shot the suspect. He was dead. When my mom came up to the front porch, we saw wet, muddy footprints coming up the steps and smeared on the door like he had kicked it. I'm wondering if that's maybe what woke me up at first. By the time my mom got to my house and came inside, it was 5 a.m. It was winter, so it was still pitch black dark outside. We sat quietly in the bright kitchen, tiredly sipping coffee and passing my daughter back and forth. My ex-husband arrived home shortly after, and believed everything once he saw all the cops on the road blocked off. Long story short, this man had killed someone in the next town over from me about 3 or 5 minutes away. He ran to my town, through my backyard to the road through the trees, and killed another person in the house in back of me. That's when the cops showed up and he began to shoot at them, so they shot at him, all the gunfire that I heard. He lay dead in a measly patch of woods in back of my house. I had goosebumps thinking about all this murder taking place around me as I lay there in bed. When my mom left, my ex-husband put our daughter back to bed. I stepped outside on the back porch to smoke a cigarette, 8 months smoke-free. I stood there smoking and watching all the lights, a stark contrast against the early gray morning. Cold. That afternoon I ended up having to block multiple news reporters for harassing me to tell my story. I told them I had no problem telling them the story in more detail, but I didn't want to be on television. I had not slept at all, and had my daughter with me. They said they wanted her on camera too. After denying them, they kept asking if I was at work. They could come to my work to do the interview, so I ended up blocking them and moving on with my life. This happened about 2 years ago, in my second year at university. I was around 20 at the time. For context, I'm French, so if anything's weird about how I describe the university experience, that's why. At the time, I lived in a government-owned apartment building, right on the 3rd floor. My direct neighbor was my younger sister, who was studying at the same university as I. One other important thing to the story is that I'm disabled. My right leg is completely useless after an accident I had when I was 13, and I suffer from debilitating chronic pain, to such a degree that keeps me bedridden and non-verbal unless I take a twice-a-day dosage of prescribed morphine. All of that is important details, so bear with me. When I take my medication, I am able to leave my bed. On the worst days, I have to either use a wheelchair or a cane to get around. Isn't it great that we lived on the 3rd floor of a building with no elevator then? On top of that, as you might guess, morphine is a very strong pain medication. It screws with your visual and hearing perception, makes you sleepy, dizzy, lessens your reflexes, numbs your nervous system, makes you paranoid, and you get the idea. At the time, I had only been taking morphine for less than 6 months. This was after 10 years of various other pain medications, and I was still dealing with those side effects in full force. Most of them are gone now. For me, that meant mainly auditory hallucinations, sleepiness, dizziness, slow reflexes, and nervous response. At that point, I had gotten used to hearing stuff that wasn't there. Mostly clapping noises, clicking, small things ultimately. I had never hallucinated human voices, though. That night I had gone out to the center of the city to meet with some friends. It was a rare occasion for me, and I do mean rare. I didn't go out more than once every 2 months or so, for multiple reasons that my friends, bless them, understood perfectly. Being on morphine means no drinking, of course, so that's half the fun of going to the bar removed from the very start. Despite the very useful nature of the meds, I was still, and still am, in a tremendous amount of pain if I stand for more than a couple of minutes. I was sure to do a lot of that at the bar, plus walking back from the bus stop to my building, about a 5 minutes walk. But I went anyway, like I did on occasion. Now, for a few days, there had been rumors going around about a group that was going around kidnapping people from my university. From my memory, 2 girls had disappeared already, and it was suspected that a blue van was the vehicle used. Those reports were circulating on our majors group, and on the unis group as well, about the same details each time. My friends and I were skeptical, though, mostly about the blue van, because we didn't believe the van would still be running around if the information had spread enough that we were hearing about it on Facebook, you know? Not that I was thinking about any of this as I came back from the bar at around midnight. Early, I know, but I was in a lot of pain, and the bus stopped at about midnight. Missing it would mean waking up my sister so she could come pick me up at the tram station, since I was physically unable to walk the 20 minutes required. I got into the bus. Only 3 people were there, and none got out at my bus stop. Bear in mind that at this point I was in an extreme amount of pain, so much so that my vision was blurring at the edges, and I was swaying a bit from side to side, trying to minimize the weight of being on my leg. On top of that, I had just taken a fast-working morphine dose to help me get through the 5 minutes walk back to my building. Unlike my twice-a-day dose, those pills I could take to my discretion whenever I needed some quick relief. The downside of this very practical pill is that it basically knocks you out in 30 minutes. You get so sleepy you can barely keep your eyes open. Basically, you're high for about 20 minutes before passing out. I got out of the bus. On my right is a parking lot in front of a bakery with a lot of cars. It was normal because there are a lot of government-owned student flats around that block, and that's where most of them park, so I wasn't very concerned. The road I take is straight from where the bus dropped me off. For the whole walk before my building is to the right, a couple of parking spots in front of it, and a wheelchair slope going to a magnetic door. You need your magnetic student ID to open the door, then a key to the specific door to your building. As I walked by the parking lot, I could see movement in the corner of my eye. Since I was half out of it from pain and meds, I didn't turn to look at it. I could hear some noise, but I just assumed that I was hallucinating it, so I kept on walking. But then the streetlights reflect in a car window. I don't know why that specifically made me turn around. My brain was catching on to weird stuff. I briefly look over to the side, and I see an old beat-up white car, pretty long and low to the ground. In the driver's seat was an Algerian man, in his mid-50s perhaps. The neighborhood being half students, half France-born Algerian. The thing that gives me pause is more the fact that there's someone awake in the front seat of a car at 1 in the morning. Again, I was out of it, so I didn't question it. I didn't even stop walking at this point. My only thought was, put one foot in front of the other. You're almost there and almost done with the pain. Literally all my attention and focus was putting one foot after the other because I was in so much pain. I walked past the small roundabout to my left, still going straight, when I heard a car starting up. I don't know why that was the thing that slapped me in the face, but suddenly I became very worried. My heart was beating fast, probably half of the meds and half from fear. But also I was well aware the morphine tends to make me paranoid. I tried to calm myself down. I saw the headlights coming from behind me, drawing a long shadow right in front of me. In a second I ran through the calculations. I'm still about 300 meters, about 1,000 feet from my building. Then I need to get my ID out and open the door. A slow, automatic magnetic door. I can't run, obviously. I can barely even walk. I'm up to my head in morphine. It's the middle of the night. I'm alone with no residential building close enough to hear a scream. And that's when I started to panic. It appears I was right to do so. And the car catches up to me, slows down to my walking speed. I noticed that the man wasn't alone in the car anymore. Someone was in the passenger seat, and there was movement in the back. I didn't turn my head because I tried to pretend I didn't notice them slowing down. I had my earphones in with no music, as I didn't turn it back on after the bus ride. I kept on walking, hoping with everything I had they would leave me alone. I was trying to walk faster, but I was in so much pain that tears started falling from my face. I could hear their calling for my attention, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. Finally, I see the lane going up to my building. I take my backpack off and I shove my hand down the front pocket, fumbling because my nervous response is shit thanks to the meds. I couldn't feel my fingers, and I was shaking like crazy. I couldn't find my ID anywhere. At that point, I was close to a panic attack. My heart was beating too fast, and I felt close to fainting from the combined pain and terror. I turned to face the wheelchair slope when I see from the corner of my eye the car stopping abruptly right next to the slope and the car door slamming open. I don't know how I did it. I was so close to fainting, but I managed to run the last 10 feet to the door and slap my ID on the reader, the whole time yelling at the door to open faster. I could hear people starting to run behind me. The door finally opened enough for me to slip in, and I slammed it shut behind me. I heard the men run into the door with a loud noise, and them cursing, then yelling things to me. I didn't stick around to hear what they had to say. I fumbled with my keys to the point of almost dropping them before opening the door to my flat complex. I got inside on shaky legs, and as soon as the door closed behind me, I dropped to the floor and had the worst panic attack of my life. When I managed to put myself back together and painstakingly climb the 3 flights of stairs, I crawled into my sister's flat. We left our doors open for each other for precisely these circumstances. I woke her up, telling her the whole story. She told me later I was deathly pale, so much that I scared her enough that she offered for me to share her bed that night. I was too fucked up to refuse. The worst part is, this isn't even the end of the story. My sister went out to bars a lot more than I did. She was able-bodied and drop-dead gorgeous. About 3 weeks later, she called me up in the middle of the night. She was coming back from a bar. She had seen that exact car I described in the parking lot, stationed at the bus stop. She didn't stop to see if there was anyone inside. She reacted right away and sprinted to our building. Of course, she was a lot faster than my drug-disabled ass, so she made it to the door where I was waiting for her, having it opened from the inside, just as the car stopped in the lane. After that, we left a note in our flat complex's door to explain everything to other people. We posted about it on every university group we knew of, and even contacted the police. They helpfully told us they could do nothing without catching them in the act, but that they'd probably send someone to patrol. It matched the reports they had gotten that had sparked the whole blue van rumors in the first place. In the following year it took to finish my degree, neither me or my sister saw those men or their car again. We still hear from people, though, that same kind of story being shared from all other parts of the city. As far as we can tell, they're still active 2 years later. I'm still fucked up about it. This happened about a year ago. There were so many terrible factors working against me that night. I'm astounded I got away unscathed, at least physically. This all begins when I'm at my friend's apartment, who lives in a really rough part of town. In a series of poor decisions, that night I decide to get belligerently drunk and take a few pills of God knows what. I know. Safe to say, after a solid night of partying, around 4 a.m. I was not in the right state of mind. My drug-addled brain decides that instead of staying the night at my friend's apartment, like I normally would, I wanted to Uber back to my own place. My friend's apartment had 2 separate entrances and exits to the building, one in the back unlit parking lot of the building, and one facing into the street. They had 2 sets of keys for each door, and I only had keys to the one in the back of the apartment. Since my Uber would obviously arrive at the street, and the door in front of the building locks itself behind you, I exited this way when the driver was soon to arrive. Looking back, standing outside that apartment, I realized I looked like the easiest target on the planet. I'm a very small, petite female, in my early 20s, and I could hardly stand upright. I'm using a street lamp to prop myself up, and not doing a very good job about it either. The light was basically a beacon for any nearby predators saying, "Come and get me." I'm not paying attention to my surroundings at all in this state, despite the fact that there was literally a bullet hole in the front door I just came out of. Not good. I remember checking to see what car I was getting picked up in, and was only able to pick out the fact that it was a black sedan. Soon after stepping outside, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. They started rolling down the window, so I stepped forward. Before this man even spoke, though, I could immediately feel that something was wrong. He had an expression like he was tearing me apart with just his eyes. After seeing that look, it gave me a new meaning to the word predator to describe a criminal, because I then knew what it felt like to be the prey. He basically barked at me, "Hey, I'm your Uber driver." This was the second red flag that somehow made its way through my brain. Normally, Uber drivers just roll down the window and say, "Hey, is that you?" or some version of that, but always including your name. I think I just stared at him for a moment, my brain slowly piecing together the situation I was potentially in. I asked him, "Hey, what's my name?" He immediately got enraged and started screaming about how he didn't have time for this. Just get in the fucking car. I don't think I've ever sobered up so fast in my life. I was completely panicking. Obviously, this was not my Uber. And quickly checking the license plate, I immediately noticed that it was not a match. Meanwhile, this guy was still screaming at me, and I had absolutely no idea what to do. If I bolted in either direction, this guy could easily outrun me or even have a weapon. I was also pretty sure that if he was trying to nab a random girl off the street, he must have a weapon of some sort. I can't run back into the apartment door right behind me since it's locked, and I don't have the keys nor the time to unlock it if I did. Running towards the back door would do nothing as well. He was idling right by the mouth of the driveway towards the back parking lot. Again, I wouldn't have time to find the keys and get in. If I screamed, well, I'm not exactly in the type of neighborhood where someone would try to be a vigilante. I can still hear the music radiating from my friend's third-floor apartment. I knew they wouldn't be able to hear me. It was 4 a.m., and absolutely no one was around. People talk a lot in this sub how they either sprint into action or freeze, but I felt incapable of doing either. It was the worst feeling I've ever felt in my life. Everything in me wanted to run, but I felt that if I did, it would be the end of me. But if I kept standing there, staring at chalk and the screaming man, the result would likely be the same. From when he started screaming at me to this point, I'm guessing about only 20 seconds had passed by. Just as he was looking like he was ready to jump out of the car and make his way towards me, another black sedan pulled up right behind him. Checking the license plate as quickly as I could, I realized it was my actual Uber driver and made a full sprint to the car. I threw myself in, screaming at my real Uber driver, "What's my name?" The poor dude looked terrified, but he responded with my real name quickly. I replied, "Get me the fuck out of here. That man is trying to kidnap me." If I was in the Uber driver's position, I think I would be too shocked to react as quickly as he did. But my dude flew out of there. He offered to call the cops for me even, which I declined and now regret. He even walked me to my front door of my apartment, ensuring I got inside safely. And truly an incredible human being. You can rest easy knowing he got the fattest tip my college student bank account would allow for, although he deserved much, much more. So, to the man who ruined my sense of security and caused countless anxiety attacks when out in public for months, let's not meet. I go for a short run every night right after sundown, usually when it's finally cool out. I always take the same route, a loop through a quiet and sparsely populated neighborhood, and I now realize how easy of a target that made me. A short section of the route passes an unlit park. A couple of weeks ago, I'd seen a guy hanging out behind a truck that was parked next to the entrance. It was so unusual to see someone else up there that I decided to be extra cautious, turn around, and head back home. I didn't get close enough to get a good look at his face. A few days later, I saw what looked to be the same guy by the park again. I figured I was probably just being paranoid, but I decided to turn around again just in case. I hadn't noticed any activity by the park in the last several days, so I resumed my normal route and didn't even think about the man I'd seen up there. And then last night, as I was passing by the park, I suddenly had an inexplicable feeling that I was being watched. I couldn't spot anyone nearby, but the park extends into pitch-black darkness, so someone could easily hide there unseen. I decided to just keep running, looking confident and try to hurry past the park as quickly as I could. Suddenly, I smelled a very strong wave of cologne in the air. That immediately put me on edge. I'm pretty damn grateful he was wearing it, so it tipped me off. After I smelled it, I had no doubt in my mind that there was somebody nearby, but still, I didn't see any movements in front or on either side of me. I was afraid to turn around. Immediately past the park, there's a bend in the road. There's a house on the corner as you turn down the road. The house has a lot of tall bushes in the front yard. Normally, I would run past these without even thinking, but since my gut instinct was blaring like a siren, I moved to the middle of the street as I rounded the corner. I shot a glance behind me to see if anyone had actually been nearby. As I looked, I saw a man slowly walking through the front yard of the house on the corner, looking right at me. He paused and crouched behind the bushes, as if he was trying to remain hidden. I could see his jeans and a pair of black and white sneakers, but little else. His slow footsteps were so creepy that I can't get the image out of my mind, as if he was trying to be quiet as he could, like a cat stalking its prey. If I hadn't made the split decision to run in the middle of the street and away from the yard, I would have been right within grabbing distance. I don't know how I acted so quickly, probably thanks to adrenaline. I turned on the flashlight on my phone. I aimed it right at the bushes, hoping it'd startle him or blind him long enough for me to get some distance in between us, and started sprinting at full speed down the road. It was probably the fastest I've ever run in my life. At the end of each block, I glanced behind me to check if the man was still there. Fortunately, I'd lost sight of him. If he'd decided to sprint after me, I'm not sure what I would have done. From what I could make out, he was at least a foot taller than me. By the time I got home, the adrenaline had finally dissipated, and I was shaking with fear. I couldn't sleep at all last night. What scared me the most about this whole thing is that I'm 99% sure this was the same guy I'd seen hanging out in front of the park recently. Now I can't shake the idea that he'd been watching me, calculating the right timing to try and sneak up behind me. He knew that I always ran past there around the same time. The thought that he was probably watching me from the darkness in the park last night, before quietly moving out of it and starting to follow me, makes me sick. Needless to say, I won't be running past that park at night anymore. The terror I felt when I turned around and saw the man's shoes slowly moving behind the bushes and his head facing me, it's like nothing else I've ever felt before. I live in a small town, the kind where almost everyone knows each other. It also creeps me out to think that this might have been someone I've seen around town in the past. Part of me wishes I could have gotten a better look at his face for the report. Another part is glad I didn't. Over the years, as a woman who has declined every proposal of marriage or conventional living arrangement, largely moving through life as a single female, I've gathered more tales of dangerous chance encounters than I can even rattle off in a whole day. Stalkings, a murderer that's never been apprehended, death threats, actual physical assaults, and I'm not especially defiant of common sense or rules to live by, i.e. I don't walk home after dark. I never open the door to strangers. I'm not chatty or inclined to give people I meet my phone number, even if they seem stable. Really, I'm just socially lazy. But my earliest memory of contact with a predator predates the invention of the internet, when I was just a child living with my also very single mother. We had just moved into a large white American colonial-style home across the street from a daycare center. It was the nicest home we had lived in so far, which says a lot because my mother was forever struggling to keep me clothed and fed, while my father pursued his dreams of being an artist. He could afford to pay little in child support, but he did pay without fail every month, and ultimately became a very successful painter and left me a very impressive legacy. I'm very proud to be his daughter. I was excited because I had the entire downstairs level to serve as my own personal play palace, away from my chronically high-strung mother, and she was relieved to be directly across the street from reliable childcare. Perhaps the low rent had something to do with the fact that our neighbors to the right were Moonies, essentially members of a worldwide cult referred to as the Unification Movement. A group of them lived in an upscale home a stone's throw away, with shuttered windows that never opened, and we almost never laid eyes on them, never during the daytime, never ever. And to the left was Ron. Ron was a middle-aged man, probably in his 40s, a little more than a decade older than my mother. I was 7 at the time and pretty observant and stoic for a child, so it didn't escape my notice that Ron was very eccentric, peculiar, always wound up and kind of dopey at the same time. He had wild dark hair that stuck up and kind of fanned out on the sides but was thinning on top, where he insisted on conspicuously combing in such a manner as to hide his visible scalp. He wore wire-rimmed glasses that magnified his eyes, and somehow lent him an air of goofy harmlessness, like the fourth missing stooge. When we first met Ron, who appeared in our front yard one afternoon, after she collected me from daycare, My mother's weirdo meter went off right away. They seemed overeager to be living next to a financially strapped single mother and her strange daughter. My mother was beautiful by any standards, however. Tall, willowy, with dark blonde hair that ended at her waist, perpetually the perfect shade of tan thanks to her Native American grandparents that raised her most of her formative years. Really a striking and unusually beautiful woman, but troubled, very troubled. She was troubled for a lot of cultural reasons, which left her socially awkward and gun-shy, also sympathetic to other socially challenged individuals, so she decided to give Ron the benefit of the doubt. I thought, and later she would say she thought as well, that Ron just developed a very big crush, fast and understandably. It started with a locket which had a picture of me inside of it. That was the very first gift he surprised her with, calling up to the house standing outside our fence. It looked like an antique to us, which Ron confirmed he came across at work, as he was an antiques dealer. My mother was deeply disturbed by the photo of me, which was obviously taken unbeknownst to anyone while I was playing in the yard. Back then, everything was done with 35mm film. No one had cell phones or home printers, even disposable cameras. We had Polaroid and 35mm, and this was 35mm, meaning there were likely other photos of me which had been developed sitting in his house. My mother tried to refuse the gift, explaining that she was not by any means okay with anyone taking photos of her daughter without her consent. Ron appeared to be inconsolably apologetic, so she accepted, reluctantly thanked him, and we both returned inside. The next gift was a large stereo system. Stereo systems were not cheap in those days, and this was one of the more expensive models. Ron, who always looked especially sweaty and sickly in the Texas heat, said he had received it from a pawn shop owner he was friendly with. He had a home stereo, though, as well as a system at the antique shop, so he couldn't benefit from it. He didn't want to go through the trouble of selling it, and wouldn't want it to go to waste when it could go to us, since he was certain we would not have a system of our own. He was right. We just had a little boom box. Well, I had one. My mother had books and her writing, and eschewed other forms of entertainment as brain-rotting. My mother refused the extravagant gift, but Ron begged her to take it for my sake. Finally, she relented, incredibly uncomfortable. She said she could at least listen to Tina Turner, of whom she was quite the fan. However, she took Ron's suggestion and set the system up in my den downstairs. The third gift was a camera, an obviously expensive professional camera, which he again claimed he had received from a friend who was in some sort of retail business. These items didn't look used in any way, and my mother really wanted the attention to stop at this point. She flatly refused the gift and drew her line in the sand. No more gifts. None. Period. She began to dread coming home from work, and I was no longer allowed to play in the yard. Despite the absence of gifts, Ron would still appear at the fence or catch my attention from the bottom window. I would instinctively go get my mother, who would come down and firmly but politely tell him it was not a good time for visiting or neighborly chit-chat. My mother and father had just worked out a new visitation schedule, and I was to begin spending Saturday nights at his house. Up to that point, I had spent Friday nights there, but it was all 6 of one, half a dozen of the other as far as she was concerned. So Saturday it was. That first Saturday went pretty smoothly, until the following morning, when my father returned me to my mother's house, and we learned that someone had broken into the home, taken nothing, gone nowhere except the downstairs. My mother had heard them come in, and quietly locked the door at the top of the stairs. It was a weird feature we were suddenly grateful for. She proceeded to hide from the intruder until he left some minutes later. I had just fortunately been away at the time, because it was quite typical of me to stay up late on a Saturday night, listening to the stereo since there was no school or work the next day. The police told her she needed a dog of any size, and to go get herself a gun. She took off work the next day, and I stayed another night with my father while she went shopping for a shotgun. At some point, while talking to my father about the incident, the matter of neighbors came up, and Ron entered the conversation. When my father learned about all the attention Ron had fixed on my mother, he was naturally quite alarmed, especially for me, who he was worried might get caught in the crosshairs. My dad was kind of a vaguely emotionally unavailable man, but he was not an absentee father by any means, and I knew beneath his somewhat distant, placid surface that he loved me very greatly. My mother would later tell me about his duality, unable to pass up taking in a stray dog or cat, but he would come home from bars covered in other people's blood. He had been a boxer for many years in the service, and he was unafraid of even people he probably should have avoided. Something of a wild card. You never knew what he would do when push came to shove. Some time went by, not a great deal, a week or two. I began to notice Ron walking by my school often when we were at lunch recess. He'd stop by and say hi to me, which no one seemed to notice. I didn't mention it to my parents because I really didn't understand the concept of child predators at that age, and because Ron never engaged me beyond saying hello or waving as he walked along the fence. It never occurred to me that anything untoward was happening. Finally, one day, he stopped at the fence and said, "Hey, I'm gonna get some ice cream. It's so hot out, you know? Aren't you hot?" It was Houston, Texas. Even as a child born and raised, I remember sweating in my shoes and speculating about the blistering temperature with friends. Is it 120 degrees? 200 degrees? We didn't know, but we thought it was close and had overheard news reports of elderly people expiring from heat stroke. My father always spoke of melting into a puddle on the sidewalk, and it conjured images of grandmothers liquefying like candles into unidentifiable pools of wax on the concrete. So, hell yes, I was fucking hot. I nodded. "I really wish I could take you to get some ice cream with me," he said, sticking his fingers to the high chain-link fence. "Hey!" he exclaimed as though he was suddenly brained with a brilliant idea. "You want to come with me to go get some ice cream?" There was a defining moment in my child's brain when it became something other than simply the mind of a child. I somehow understood then that Ron was not just Crazy Ron, as my parents had called him. He was sinister. His intentions were darker than a child could fathom, but I seemed to snap to that awareness too. Up to that point, we had been warned what adults who sought to hurt children would say to lure us away from safety. It was all over television commercials, billboards, pamphlets. Police and guest speakers visiting our school would recite the script lines meant to tempt us with promises of pixie sticks and bubblegum. But they never told us what happened after that, what they would actually do after dropping the bait. And I didn't need to know. An uneasy feeling crept over me, and I backed as quickly as I could away from the fence, telling him that I needed to go. Recess was almost over. About an hour later, I was called into the principal's office. I was terrified. I had never been called down to the office before. I was still a pretty well-behaved kid at this stage in my life. Once I walked in, I saw both my parents and my stomach dropped. My mother was visibly shaken, and my father was pacing back and forth. I had only seen my father angry one time that I could recall, and yet I knew in my gut that he was seething in anger in that moment. I knew I was really fucked if my mother and father had to leave their respective jobs to come deal with something I had done. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out what I'd done wrong, though. I quickly learned, though, that Ron had gone into the office, stating that he was my father. He was coming to pick me up, and we would be moving to another state, so I wouldn't be returning. Luckily, my father was a very involved parent, and he was also friends with the artist boyfriend of my teacher at the time. We often ran into them at the art supply store, and Miss Curry knew extremely well what my real father looked like. When she received word that my father was there to whisk me away for good, she went straight to the office to learn more. The man standing before her was clearly not my father, and the staff's internal alarms were rung. The police had already taken Ron, and I'm not really sure what happened next. I do know at some point in the days that followed, Ron returned home briefly, long enough for my father to find him. Unfortunately, my father is no longer living, and he can't fill in the blanks at this part of the story, but I do remember he came straight to the house looking flustered, holding one hand in another and wincing. He told us that Ron wouldn't be living next door any longer, and if we ever saw a trace of him again, that my father would kill him with his bare hands. He took me to his house for several days, and when I returned home, Ron was gone. police continued to move in and out of his house for the rest of the week. There were no stalking laws at the time in Texas, and even kidnapping was a fairly new concept to law enforcement, with limited protocols in place. It was the 80s, but what I have been able to piece together is that eventually, the police were able to tie Ron to the break-in at my mother's house, where he had likely gone, clumsily planning to abduct me. Whatever they found in his house was enough to keep him behind bars. We learned that Ron had been living with his mother, Norman Bates style, his entire life, until she died not long before, leaving him the house next to us and the antique shop. He was not a well-balanced adult, and was likely psychosexually stunted for reasons I can never really know. The part that really makes me uneasy here is Ron's plan to move with me in tow. I couldn't imagine he was actually planning to abandon the home he owned. I don't know if he was simply being compulsive, thinking he would work out the kinks after he got me in his clutches, or if he had some terrible plan to dispose of me and the evidence before I was officially declared missing. My mother purchased a German Shepherd, violating the terms of her lease, and we had to move to a garage apartment across town, so we never saw Ron again. Hopefully no one did outside of fellow prisoners, but I suspect he was eventually released back into society again at some point. Who knows? I doubt he's even still alive in 2020. I suppose the most frightening aspect of the whole ordeal is not that he existed in the first place, but that my mother was never the target, only an obstacle, and all the flattery and attempts to infiltrate her life were simply the acts of a man trying to get around her to her child.
What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed the content of this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you do decide you like my content enough to subscribe, please be sure to hit the bell button right next to the subscribe button and turn notifications to all so you can be notified of every video I post in the future. If you don't feel like doing that though, I post a video nearly every day, so you can just come back every now and then and check up on what you missed. If you guys have any criticisms on what I can do better or any feedback on the stories in the video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as I always enjoy reading all the comments and I try to give them hearts and respond when I can. If you guys would like to reach me for any reason, or you would like to send in a story to be read, you can go ahead and take a look in the description below the video. You'll find a link to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has a theme, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Last but not least, I also run two other channels, Mr. Blue Skies and Darkest Hour, where I do true crime videos and dark documentaries respectively. If that kind of content sounds interesting to you, why not go ahead and check it out and see if it is for you. Aside from that though, guys, I think that's pretty much it for now, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.